I feel comfortable saying without hyperbole that the most recognizable face in pop culture today is SpongeBob SquarePants. This is a position that the character has maintained for nearly 30 years with no sign of slowing down, maintaining a hold on culture such that there are adults born after the show began to air who are still intimately familiar with the guy. There are people born after the show is considered to have stopped being good who are intimately familiar with the guy. Now, a major reason for this continued prominence comes from the fact that SpongeBob as a media franchise exists far beyond the show he is from. This includes much more than official materials, as the memes alone count for an extravagant degree of the character's recognizability. Yet rather than his popularity extending to just being the origin of a bunch of memes, people are still able to quote from memory the episodes surrounding said memes. I could do a video on SpongeBob that is several hours longer than this one, going through each episode and trying to connect it to the pop culture of the time, as well as pulling anecdotes, real and historical, from the subtext. But I don't think that's necessary to do, especially as most of these shows' legacy is built on the first 3 seasons. So instead, I'll focus on these 3 seasons alone to try to answer the following question: why is SpongeBob still so beloved? Sure, the show was good. That's a big factor. It has to be. But there are plenty of good shows from the same era that don't have the same continued cultural reach as early season SpongeBob does. There are shows that were equivalent cultural juggernauts from that era that have nonetheless fallen off in relevance over the years, while SpongeBob only seems to be becoming more recognizable. So this video isn't just about why SpongeBob was good, but how the humor managed to be so enduring. Why hasn't it aged? Why do we still find it humorous? Why did we find it humorous to begin with? Though that might be taking it a step too far, or maybe assigning too much subjectivity. SpongeBob began as Bob the Sponge, a character in the educational comic The Intertidal Zone, which was a design by creator Stephen Hillenburg to teach marine biology facts to his students while also being entertaining enough to be memorable. This early version of Bob the Sponge looked almost nothing like the SpongeBob we know, nor did he even act like the guy. He was a co-host character to Rocky the Shrimp, who wore a bow tie and would have been huge on Tumblr if he were around then. Bob the Sponge didn't even have SquarePants. Anyway, this video's format is going to be similar to what I usually do. It isn't much of a video, just a slideshow with my voiceover. Put it on a second monitor or a phone screen while you do something else. So without further ado, let's drop on the deck and flop like a fish. Help wanted. SpongeBob attempts to get hired by the Krusty Krab so he can live out his dream of being a fry cook. But his neighbor, Squidward, warns his boss, Mr. Krabs, about the guy's hyperactive personality. So to avoid hiring him, Krabs gives SpongeBob an impossible task to find a very specific spatula. Then the restaurant is swarmed by anchovies, who begin to tear up the place as they refuse to be orderly. When all hope is lost, SpongeBob returns with the exact spatula required, and he proceeds to serve every single one of the anchovies so quickly, Mr. Krabs hires him on the spot. Pilot episodes are intended to sell the show to networks, and they do this by showing off the absolute best of what the show has to offer. Here, SpongeBob SquarePants shows off not an original plot, but a repurposing of the Jerry Lewis film The Bellboy, swapping out the chair scene for cooking fast food. Of course, the origin of this trope dates even further back, whether it's the tale of the bamboo cutter from the 10th century, or even the biblical tale of Arrgh. So this episode is less about the story itself, as it's a story that's been told so many times, but rather about the characters adapted into the story. SpongeBob is not seeking out a hand to marry, nor is he being sent to the front lines of a battle. He simply wants to be a fry cook, a job that culturally has signified low status. The episode opens with SpongeBob training in order to lift 2 stuffed animals as part of his workout, then it ends with him succeeding at getting an entry-level job. At the time, this was entry-level. SpongeBob is a sponge with low ambitions for himself, and yet for as small and simple as the premise and goal of the characters are, the effort that he puts in and the enthusiasm he shows are what sells the audience on the guy. He tries his best, so whatever he achieves is worthy of praise. So SpongeBob's pilot is an episode that pulls unfamiliar characters into a familiar story, so the only focus is on who is doing the plot instead of what plot they're doing. These characters are introduced pretty efficiently. Patrick is introduced as he tries to motivate SpongeBob, but fails to come up with more than 2 reasons why he'd be a great fry cook. Not that this hurts the speech. Squidward is introduced scrubbing anti-Squidward graffiti off of the front door. Mr. Krabs is introduced by sniffing a pile of money. and SpongeBob's first impressions on the Krusty Krab see him falling on his face and bouncing around in an over-the-top and silly manner, only to then solve the problem with a cooking montage that is equally silly and over-the-top. Reef Blower. Squidward kicks a shell from his lawn to SpongeBob. SpongeBob sees the shell and overreacts by blasting it with a reef blower, until it, and all the sand around it, wind up bothering Squidward. The overuse of this machine then jams it, and SpongeBob's wind-up to get it back online ends up absorbing all the water in the ocean before exploding, with the shell landing back in Squidward's face. As a typical episode of SpongeBob lasts 11 minutes and the pilot was only 8, this 3-minute short was added to pad out the pilot's length so it could air alongside the rest of the program. It has no dialogue and is told entirely through musical cues and overreactions on the characters' faces, most obviously reminiscent of the old Looney Tunes shorts. Contrary to popular internet legends, this was not an intentional homage, nor was it an affordance for some faulty recording equipment, but rather, it was due to minimum pay agreements with the Screen Actors Guild, making it not worthwhile to pay a full day rate for 3 minutes of episode. Still, what better way to show prospective audiences the strength of your characters than by having them not talk for the entire plot while still making the episode work perfectly? Tea at the Treedome. While jellyfishing, SpongeBob sees a land squirrel being attacked by a giant clam, and he rushes over to save her using his karate. This squirrel, Sandy Cheeks, ends up fine on her own, but seeing as they share a love of karate, they introduce themselves and Sandy invites SpongeBob to her tree dome, but she warns him that the dome is full of air, something SpongeBob naively says he's fine with despite not knowing what air is. He asks Patrick, who conflates it with putting on airs, meaning acting fancy, and he says SpongeBob will be fine as long as he keeps his pinky up and acts like a good houseguest. With this knowledge, SpongeBob goes to the tree dome for tea, where he quickly learns that air means he can't breathe. Trying to be a good guest, though, SpongeBob refuses to say he needs water, sneaking around to take in any water he can while trying to be polite. Eventually he caves, admitting he needs water, and drinking from the vase Sandy puts his flowers in. Patrick rushes in to stop him from ruining things, quickly discovering that he needs water to live as well. The two are given helmets that are a reverse of Sandy's, and the episode ends happily as they finally realize the value of voicing your needs to your friends. The introduction of Sandy, as well as an expansion on Patrick's character, specifically his dynamic to SpongeBob's naivety. SpongeBob knows very little about how the world works, he just tries to maintain a positive attitude. He says yes a lot, and then tries to wing it from there. This sort of naivety results in him going to a tree dome with no water, and being a filter feeder, sponges need water to live. This naivety plays off of Patrick's character. Patrick is equally ignorant of the way that the world works, except he pretends to know everything about it, despite not having any experience to back that up. Patrick Star literally lives under a rock after all. So he confuses necessity with personality, but because he speaks confidently and matter-of-factly about it, SpongeBob believes him, confusing it again later as he assumes that the reason he can't breathe is because he isn't a good houseguest. Bubblestand. SpongeBob annoys Squidward by building a bubble stand, selling blows of a bubble wand for 25 cents. Patrick buys one, then when he fails to make bubbles, buys bubble-blowing lessons, where SpongeBob teaches him the technique. After Squidward's house is hit by a passing elephant, he comes outside and tries to shut down the stand by telling off SpongeBob and Patrick. But his curiosity gets the better of him and he attempts to blow a bubble, and another, refusing SpongeBob's lessons as he insists he can do it himself. Soon he begins to mockingly mimic SpongeBob's technique before screaming a massive bubble that carries away his house, popping while airborne as SpongeBob and Patrick pretend they didn't see anything. The general trend in these early episodes revolving around Squidward is that he tends to over-escalate when he's annoyed by SpongeBob and/or Patrick. They do something mildly annoying. He ends up trying to stop them and winds off much worse than if he had done nothing at all. For example, in the previous short, we saw Squidward trying to remove refuse from his lawn onto SpongeBob's, which resulted in the guy's whole yard covered in sand. Here, he tells off SpongeBob for being too loud, then proceeds to play the clarinet loudly and poorly, setting up a theme of hypocrisy. This is followed up on when Squidward insults SpongeBob for charging money for bubbles, changed to Patrick for paying for it, all while secretly being jealous of the fun they're having, as is revealed when he tries to blow the wand himself. He then proceeds to blow a proper bubble by copying SpongeBob's technique, though he refuses to acknowledge he had any help at all and says he's a prodigy. Narratively, Squidward was the antagonist of the episode, punished by having everything he wanted for a brief moment. He was annoyed by his neighbors being loud until the two of them were loudly celebrating his accomplishments, then he was fine with the noise. He even started playing the clarinet better after blowing his big bubble, the confidence boost clearly having a positive effect on his abilities, though he refuses to recognize where the boost came from, so he can't emulate it again. It's at the end of the episode when his house comes crashing down that SpongeBob and Patrick even agreed to give him the solitude he wanted, just for a different reason than he was expecting. Ripped Pants. SpongeBob and Sandy are at the beach of Goo Lagoon, with SpongeBob trying to impress Sandy with comedy. But when Larry the Lobster comes by and begins showing off his muscles, SpongeBob fails to mimic him. Then, he rips his pants, causing everyone to laugh at him. But SpongeBob realizes Sandy's laughing too, so he continues to rip his pants in every activity they do together, even as the joke begins to wear thin. Soon he resorts to fake drowning to commit to the bit, but this time, no one, not even Sandy, thinks it's funny. SpongeBob fails to come up with another comedy routine as all of his ideas involve pants. Then his rhetorical question about whether he's the beach's biggest loser is answered by 3 others who all have various maladies. In the end, they sing a song about how the worst thing that can happen to you is to lose your friends, and this sincerity is enough to once again make SpongeBob popular. SpongeBob learns about the power of humor and soon after, its limitations. He cannot impress Sandy the same way Larry did, worse because Sandy herself values physical strength, so he tries to show off in a different, more authentic way. It's interesting to look at some of the dynamics of the earlier seasons here. While a lot of what made SpongeBob SquarePants such a memorable show were aspects of its writing and voice acting and animation early on, some things still didn't click until far later, like SpongeBob trying to impress Sandy as though he had a crush on her, or being romantic rivals against Larry for her affection. SpongeBob shifting from being the strong guy who can lift with Sandy to the funny guy who can make her laugh is a good shift since it fits his personality. The issue is just that he overcommits. Any joke, no matter how funny, will be less funny the more frequently it's repeated. Although to contradict this statement, the show's been running reruns since 1999, and it's still considered to be the pinnacle of comedy to this day. SpongeBob does manage to win back his old friends by being open with his emotions instead of just deflecting conversations for laughs, making new friends along the way who have also suffered, as they come together over their loss. People like comedy and comedians, but they remember the way they felt. Jellyfishing. SpongeBob and Patrick invite Squidward to go jellyfishing with them, but he sarcastically turns them down, only to immediately suffer an accident due to the jellyfish the other two angered, falling off his bike and exploding. While recovering in a wheelchair, SpongeBob and Patrick attempt to make his first day home the best day ever, with soup and music. But they quickly put these hobbies away to give Squidward what they think he really wants, to go jellyfishing with them. After stumbling around for a bit, Squidward actually attempts to catch a jellyfish himself, succeeding but running afoul of a queen jellyfish who electrocutes him. There's a bit of irony to the fact that SpongeBob and Patrick are terrible at jellyfishing, unable to catch anything without injuring themselves, while Squidward picks it up so quickly, he ends up in more danger than if he had followed the lead of the others. Just kind of a minor thing in this episode. Later episodes show that SpongeBob is actually very good at catching jellyfish, which is a bit inconsistent, though not so much as to take away from the show at all. Whatever is the funniest outcome is what the show will do, and audiences are generally okay with a bit of a break from the show's internal consistency if it's done in service of a gag. A common complaint about some of the later season episodes of SpongeBob is that some of the episodes seem to exist just to torture Squidward for no reason. Yet here, episode number 6 of the show, Squidward's already having his hand stabbed through and his face electrocuted. All because he was indirect in turning down a jellyfishing trip by being sarcastic instead of just saying no. Plankton. Plankton, Mr. Krabs' old business rival, is foiled in an attempt to steal a Krabby Patty once again. So to get his hands on the formula himself, he strikes at the newest member of the Krusty crew, SpongeBob. After failing to manipulate the guy with flattery, he sneaks into SpongeBob's home and places a college-educated device into his brain. He controls SpongeBob to break into the Krusty Krab and steal a patty to bring back to an analyzer that'll tell him its exact makeup. But before he can drop the burger into the machine, SpongeBob describes it in such an alluring way, Plankton dives in himself, getting trapped in the machine as SpongeBob safely leaves. Plankton fits the show as an antagonist because his antics are taken about as seriously as those of the rest of the cast, which is to say not at all. There is a disparity between his cartoonish attempts at being taken seriously and the vocal delivery of Mr. Lawrence, who, in any other body, would be properly intimidating. His entire personality is that he wishes to be taken seriously, he brags about his education, that he went to college, but his actual plans are pretty poorly thought out. He centered his life around a feud with Mr. Krabs, and yet to Krabs he's a mild annoyance at best. In Karen's own words, he's 1% evil, 99% hot gas. Naughty Nautical Neighbors. SpongeBob and Patrick are annoying Squidward's date with a souffle by giggling over bubbles in a scene that perfectly captures how it felt to get your first cell phone and to text your friend sitting in the same room. He sabotages their game enough that they break up as friends, giving him the quiet he prefers. Then he chokes on his fork while laughing at the others, only to be saved by Patrick. As a thanks for saving his life, Squidward declares the two to be friends, and Patrick plays along as it's bothering SpongeBob to see them together. Squidward throws out his back trying to drag a sleeping Patrick out of his house, which SpongeBob fixes, saving Squidward and running the same friendship gambit. SpongeBob and Patrick then go back and forth, competing for Squidward's affection by harassing the guy. So Squidward plots to get the two of them back together by arranging for a dinner party, inviting both over. He then leaves them unattended while pretending he is out of soda, and when the two gorged guests start belching in silence, they laugh so hard that they destroy the house, but fix their friendship. SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship was ended over a guy trying to get some laughs and then was repaired by the two of them laughing together, part of a general motif where any two people who can share a joke together are able to share almost anything. Even today, most of the most memed moments of the show are just the funny screenshots or the memory of what the characters said. We connect to each other through SpongeBob, not because it was a culturally resonant show, but because it was a funny show. It is culturally resonant because it is funny. The main part of the continued relevance of SpongeBob is that it can be repurposed into individual gags, separate from the original jokes. Boating School. SpongeBob is ready for his final exam in boating school, even though he's failed the test 37 times in a row. I don't know if this is a Clerks reference. He aces the oral part of the exam like always, and then he wrecks the boat on the practical half of the exam, as he always does. While at home lamenting that he's never going to pass this test, he's greeted by Patrick trying to cheer him up. While talking, they get the idea to simply have Patrick take the exam for him remotely with a walkie-talkie inside of SpongeBob's head hidden beneath a cowboy hat. The day of the exam arrives and SpongeBob, much to the shock of his teacher Mrs. Puff, actually succeeds with Patrick's secret coaching. Just as he's about to wrap up a successful exam, Mrs. Puff jokingly suggests his exact method of passing, and when she mentions that this is technically cheating, SpongeBob panics so hard he crashes the boat again. In the end, he returns to riding his unicycle around as Gary took it out of the trash. When SpongeBob was first being pitched, the Nickelodeon executives wanted to retool the show to make SpongeBob a student and for the show to have a school setting. This went against Hillenburg's designs, so a compromise was struck where SpongeBob attended boating school, so he could still be a working adult while also having the occasional school episode. Longtime viewers will probably be a bit shocked to see Patrick's role in the episode as the smart one. The key difference between a SpongeBob who fails his exam 38 times in a row and one with the guidance to successfully navigate the course. Patrick's character always saw him as a guy who had a baseline amount of knowledge on how the world works, who merely lacked the life experience to put that into context. Of course, he would be able to explain how the driving test works to SpongeBob, but he wouldn't be able to piece together the fact that he is cheating until Miss Puff pointed out to herself. Pizza delivery. SpongeBob and Squidward deliver a pizza. This is probably the most popular episode of SpongeBob in terms of just how many memorable bits came from it, despite the extremely simple premise. This premise doesn't even remain super consistent outside of the main goal of delivering the pizza. At first, it's about SpongeBob trying weird pioneer tricks to get them out of the situation, as Squidward ignores him, setting up a story where the core conflict is their disagreement over how well the tricks work. Except one almost gets SpongeBob hit by a truck, and another sees him suggest they eat sand. Then the moss nearly takes them home before the final and most absurd trick is suggested, simply riding back on a giant rock to civilization. The conflict between the two characters might then be about their actual commitment to the end goal of delivering pizza. SpongeBob wants to hang on to it so much he refuses to eat their only source of food and gets caught in a tornado, while Squidward cares more about himself than his job. It's not until the end of the episode where they finally end up on the same page. For all the annoying tendencies SpongeBob had, by the time they were done with the delivery, Squidward refused to allow him to be hurt by an entitled customer. Not so much entitled as rude, though he did wait a full day for his food. Squidward recognizes what the audience does at around the same time. There's no antagonist in this episode, just two sea creatures trying to survive a long trip on foot. SpongeBob might have set them back a few times, but so too did Squidward. It's not like they were out to get one another. The only real bad guy, other than maybe Mr. Krabs for sending them out in the first place, was that fish at the end who either forgot he didn't ask for a drink, or maybe Mr. Krabs didn't write it down. Anyway, people who yell at fast food employees deserve whatever's coming to them. Home Sweet Pineapple. SpongeBob's home is eaten by a swarm of nematodes, leaving him with nowhere to live but a tiny stone that used to be his house. Squidward is ecstatic that SpongeBob is going to be moving in with his parents, though Patrick offers to rebuild the house together, letting him stay. Despite, or maybe because of, their best efforts, the new home is insufficient, and SpongeBob is homeless once more. Patrick offers to let them stay together, though between his snoring, drooling, and his night terrors, SpongeBob can't sleep at all, and Squidward is even less inclined to let him stay with him. The next day, SpongeBob is preparing to leave as Squidward dances on the vacant lot, until SpongeBob plants the tiny stone in the spot, revealed as a seed left by the pineapple. It is watered by his tears, growing instantaneously into a house-sized plant that crushes Squidward, letting SpongeBob move back in forever. The opening narration of the first episode calls out a bit of pedantry by saying, of course he lives in a pineapple, although it were a silly thing to ask in the first place. This episode is tied together by the fact that what he lives in is a big fruit. This is why nematodes can drink it into non-existence in the first place, but why watering it at the end of the episode brings it back. I mean, they're underwater, so it should be watered anyway. It's not like tears are less salty than the ocean around it. This is just the proclivity of the show to randomly swap between realism and absurdity based on what the joke needs. Even then, the silliness changes rapidly enough, as consistency is the antithesis of absurdity. Does Patrick live underground with the rock above the home, or is the rock his house? The answer is whatever's funniest. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. SpongeBob and Patrick are pretending to be their favorite superheroes, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, dressing in costumes and harassing Squidward. He suggests that they go bother Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy directly because they live nearby at the retirement community. But when SpongeBob and Patrick get there, they see that the heroes are now too old and senile to care about any of the presumed evil afoot. So they plot to lure the duo out of retirement by faking crimes and assisting in their hero responsibilities, but they only succeed in annoying Barnacle Boy so much, he gets their rings back to fight SpongeBob. They use some of their underwhelming underwater powers to push the annoying kids away, realizing that it felt nice to drive SpongeBob and Patrick out of town, then returning to television to show off old man antics. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy are introduced, being a pastiche of the low-budget superhero adaptations of the 60s. While dated now, these were still in the living memories of most of the people who worked on the show in 1999. As it turns out, people who were nerdy as kids tend to continue being nerdy as adults, so the folks who watched a lot of Saturday morning programming would be more inclined to go on to produce cartoons themselves in the future. If a cartoon ever feels very nostalgic for its own medium, that's because it is. It is then interesting to see this comparison be made in the present, as SpongeBob SquarePants is a show that has lasted long enough that it's now its own Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. Kids who grew up watching the original run of SpongeBob are now old enough to potentially be the ones working on it, or at least its contemporaries in the medium. Case in point, this video was made by a guy who grew up watching SpongeBob, and I've been a fan long enough to now make derivative content of the show itself. Pickles. Bubble Bass, a notoriously picky customer, orders a complex burger from SpongeBob, only to taunt the guy when he reveals there are no pickles. SpongeBob breaks down over this public failure, as his confidence in his own fry cooking abilities are shaken. Mr. Krabs sends him home as SpongeBob's shaky cooking is costing him money, so Squidward takes over. But back in the pineapple, SpongeBob realizes he can no longer do anything that requires objects to be stacked in an order, nor can he do simple things like turning off his alarm. As Squidward is a terrible fry cook, Mr. Krabs tries to get SpongeBob back by rebuilding his confidence, staying up several nights in a row until SpongeBob accidentally makes a Krabby Patty perfectly while lamenting he can't. They return to the Krusty Krab for another showdown against Bubble Bass, only to fail as there are once again no more pickles. That is, until SpongeBob notices the gloating critic was hiding the pickles all along for the sake of, I guess, bragging or maybe skipping on paying. Bubble Bass retreats in shame and SpongeBob's return to cooking is cheered. A frequently reused plot in the show is SpongeBob leaving the Krusty Krab for whatever reason, with the antics coming from what happens to the restaurant without him. SpongeBob has only been at the Krusty Krab for a few episodes, and it's already become such an integral part of his personality that losing that little bit of himself makes him spiral and lose everything else too. This relationship goes both ways. What is the Krusty Krab without its fry cook? It's burnt shakes and liberal use of a fire extinguisher. A well-written cast is a cast that feels like something is wrong when one of them isn't present where they ought to be. It's having characters who are so associated with places and relationships they can't be removed from that context. Here, it's a silly episode about SpongeBob wearing his underwear wrong because he forgot to put pickles on a burger, and yet it still adheres to basic storytelling structure. So it can get a laugh easily enough, but we only remember the laugh because it was built on a strong literary foundation. Hall Monitor. It's SpongeBob's turn to be hall monitor at boating school, but his acceptance speech lasts too long and he wastes the whole day. Mrs. Puff allows him to take the hat and sash home so he won't be so depressed, realizing almost immediately this was a mistake. SpongeBob proves this worry accurate when he starts taking his hall monitor responsibilities outside the building, trying to direct traffic despite the fact that he, repeatedly failed boating school. After menacing Bikini Bottom, he learns of a maniac who's been menacing Bikini Bottom, recruiting Patrick in the middle of an arrest for vandalism to assist in catching the maniac. The real police show up after they split up and show Patrick the wanted poster of the maniac. Revealed as SpongeBob, though Patrick doesn't make the connection because he's too afraid of the poster. So afraid that he asks SpongeBob to pick him up, only to see the maniac coming to pick him up, menacingly. Assuming that the maniac is following him, SpongeBob runs around the city screaming and wrecking buildings before he finally sees a wanted poster with his face on it. The police surround him only for Mrs. Puff to see the commotion and accidentally confess to being the one who deputized the sponge. The only thing more dangerous than an idiot is an idiot who is convinced they are right. The fastest way to convince somebody that they're right is to give them some sort of recognition for their efforts, even if they made no effort. SpongeBob's given a uniform to stop him from complaining, the assumption being that his complaints will be more obnoxious than his policing. Despite the preview of his hall monitor work being a grand speech about nothing, this wasn't the case. Every problem he sets out to solve is a problem that didn't exist until he tried to fix it. This leads to the dramatic irony of SpongeBob getting labeled the maniac of Bikini Bottom without realizing it, creating humor from the fact that he's too naive to know he's hurting people as Patrick is too oblivious. This disparity between SpongeBob's opinion of himself and the reality of the situation then makes memeable scenes about anyone who lacks the self-awareness to realize their problems are caused by themselves. Or, as is so often the case, the problems they complain about are caused by them because they're all problems that exist in their head, like SpongeBob thinking a couple dining with a window open is a crime scene. Jellyfish Jam. SpongeBob catches a jellyfish who follows him home, with the guy deciding to adopt the wild animal as he's grown fond of it. In spite of Squidward's incredulity, he manages to have fun with this jellyfish by dancing to loud music for 12 hours straight. But issues arrive when SpongeBob wants to call it a night as the jellyfish wants to keep dancing. The jellyfish refuses to sleep and invites all its wild friends over to continue the party. Squidward attempts to get this party to quiet down, getting jellied during his first attempt, then stung when he tries to fight noise with noise. The whole time SpongeBob is failing to quiet the jellyfish down himself, until finally in the struggle, the stereo gets broken. This makes the fish rage as they all begin to swarm SpongeBob's house, chasing him and Gary to the roof. Gary starts to tap his eyes together and the jellyfish calm down to the beat, with SpongeBob Pied Pipering them back to the wild by directing the rest of the sea creatures around him into playing the song Jellyfish Jam. One of the most common plot threads in this show is SpongeBob being an annoying neighbor, which is different from Squidward, who's being a bad neighbor. The difference being that SpongeBob is obnoxious to live next to by happenstance or because of things outside his control, while the behavior of Squidward usually comes about as an intentional means of inflicting harm. See SpongeBob losing control of a house party and keeping Squidward awake, versus Squidward blasting his stereo out of a sense of revenge. The conflict of the episode is resolved when characters stop trying to fight against the jellyfish, but instead bow to the absurd. To go with the flow of the episode and acknowledge that wild animals are called wild animals because they party like Animal House. The finale is a musical number featuring stock footage of a dolphin and an escalation of a plot that began with SpongeBob dancing to music next to a clingy jellyfish. Sandy's rocket. SpongeBob notices Sandy's new rocket and asks if he can go along with her on a trip to the moon. She begrudgingly agrees, and SpongeBob stays up all night in anticipation, until Patrick asks him if he wants to alien-proof the ship together. Realizing that Sandy told him aliens don't exist, but wanting to be thorough, he and Patrick agree to spray the windows. But after arriving, they can't help but mess with some of the instruments, culminating in SpongeBob launching the rocket just to prove he knows how. They mess around in zero gravity for a bit before landing back in Bikini Bottom, though they don't know this and assume they're on the moon, where aliens have implanted their memories onto the space such that they take what they thought they think and make them think they thought their thoughts they've been thinking their thoughts to think they thought. I think. So SpongeBob and Patrick begin to use Sandy's net cannons to grab and bag all their neighbors, assuming they're alien hunting, continuing to bother the whole city until it's just the two of them left. Then they turn on each other, with Patrick netting himself. SpongeBob then returns to Bikini Bottom, this time actually landing on the moon, where he finally realizes his mistake as the cargo hold full of aliens demands a word. Probably one of the most involved plots of SpongeBob thus far. Most of the classics among classics are episodes with an extremely simple premise so as not to get in the way of the comedy. But this episode spends most of its runtime explaining things like how they got to space, what they think their neighbors are aliens for, and why they want to prove this to Sandy. This leaves less time than usual for SpongeBob and Patrick to crack more than a single joke about each scenario before they've moved somewhere else to do something different. There's a montage of capturing all their neighbors in net cannons, and despite so much of the sidecast consisting of interesting and potentially funny fish, they never get the chance to have a real reaction to the rampage outside of Squidward and maybe Gary. A good episode is one with a simple premise, and this is, pun not intended, one of the most out-there plots of the first season, and so one of the weakest. Squeaky Boots. Mr. Krabs buys his whale of a daughter Pearl a pair of fisherman's boots, rather than the flipper slippers she wanted. Not wanting to simply throw the boots away, he offers them to SpongeBob in lieu of his paycheck by claiming they're fry cook boots. SpongeBob celebrates the new boots around the restaurant, but the squeaking is so obnoxious that Squidward takes his vacation early. That night, Mr. Krabs keeps having nightmares about these boots and the noise they make. Returning to work where SpongeBob's frolicking around continues to drive him mad with the noise. So Krabs conspires to steal the boots from his cook in the night, burying them under the floorboards of the restaurant so he can have some peace and quiet. That is, until the next day, where SpongeBob is so distraught over losing the boots, he starts to cry inconsolably. The guilt of lying to his fry cook twice like this weighs so much on Mr. Krabs, he starts hallucinating these squeaky boots everywhere, getting crazy enough to dig them up and dunk them in the fryer so he can eat them. In the end, he tells SpongeBob that he never needed a pair of boots to prove he was a great fry cook, and he takes a vacation to ease his stress, only to start squeaking whenever he hiccups. Longtime viewers might be shocked to see Mr. Krabs' behavior in this episode represented as a guilt over scamming one of his employees out of money, even going so far as to return his paycheck after eating the boots. In a lot of long-running shows, the characters don't quite have their personalities established in the early seasons, only really having these traits established over the first few seasons, then built upon the foundation beyond that. Here, though, Mr. Krabs is still characterized by greed. After all, he was less distraught over giving his daughter a terrible gift that embarrassed her in front of her friends than he was over wasting money on something unwanted. It's more that his negative traits had a limit to them. He pinched pennies, but rarely so much that it broke the realm of realism, at least no more than anything else in the show. A neat little tidbit is how Mr. Krabs breaks both of his legs over his long night and winds up fine, because in the real world, crabs can just sort of jettison their limbs at will. The guy running the show was a marine biologist first, and a writer second after all. Nature Pants. SpongeBob keeps daydreaming at work, which is causing him to make too many mistakes. He tries telling Mr. Krabs about this and eventually convinces himself he wants to leave his industrious job behind to live among the wild jellyfish in nature. He gives away his possessions to his friends and even removes his square pants before he wanders into the wild. SpongeBob quickly realizes that this is not the idyllic lifestyle he thought it would be because he is not a jellyfish. He struggles to make friends and eat properly before smelling his favorite food, Krabby Patties. This is an intentional gambit by Sandy and Patrick to convince SpongeBob to come back. Though when he rejects this offer, Patrick goes mad and decides that if he can't have SpongeBob as a friend, he'll have him as a trophy. SpongeBob flees for shelter only to be driven out by the jellyfish in the hive, left in a cave to freeze while he's infested by poison sea urchins. Finally realizing he made a mistake, SpongeBob returns to civilization, only to find that all his friends are ready to welcome him back because they knew he wouldn't make it. They hug it out and all catch sea urchins. Part of the reason why SpongeBob SquarePants is so pervasive in modern meme culture is the fact that random screenshots of the show have a tendency to remain popular as image macros online. The reason for this is harder to pin down though, as it might be tempting to say that it's the hyper-exaggerated expressions that do it, but so many other shows serving as predecessors also had these same sorts of facial expressions. I mean, this was one of the hallmarks of 90s era animation, the silly face that sold a punchline. So it might be that the characters are by default very expressive and emotive. Even a more simple, regular change in facial expression has the ability to go viral, and it has the ability to be relatable. Everyone's either made one of these faces before or imagined themselves doing so. Opposite Day. After a birthday party thrown on the wrong day, Squidward decides he is finally going to move out of his house to get away from SpongeBob and Patrick. But over the phone, a realtor mentions that it's impossible to sell a home with lousy neighbors. So Squidward plots to get SpongeBob and Patrick out of the way by claiming it's opposite day. SpongeBob interprets this as intended, staying indoors and being quiet, until Patrick comes by to play along and they start to make more noise than before. When the two start to dismantle SpongeBob's house, Squidward tries to fix it so he won't scare off the realtor. This confuses SpongeBob, who concludes this is an elaborate ploy by Squidward to be the opposite of Squidward and be SpongeBob. So SpongeBob pretends to be Squidward, just in time for the realtor to arrive for a tour. When the real Squidward sees SpongeBob talking to the woman about how awful the house is, he rushes over, only to make her even angrier because now there's one more guy pretending he's Squidward. She leaves, and Squidward is stuck in the neighborhood forever, so in the spirit of Opposite Day, he shows his appreciation by chasing them out. Subtlety in characterization has never served a memorable comedy well. When telling a good joke, it helps to have characters as easy to understand as possible. SpongeBob SquarePants is no exception. In this episode, the relationship between Squidward and his neighbors is more or less spelled out exactly. SpongeBob is the opposite of Squidward. This is an idea derived from SpongeBob trying to do the opposite of what he normally does, while Squidward behaves the same way, simply trying to mitigate his neighbor's damage. To make this episode reach a conclusion, a straight man archetype had to be brought in from outside the main cast in the form of the real estate agent. Basically, a normal fish to see the antics from the outside and acknowledge how weird it really is. All of this despite Squidward usually being the normal one in the group in order to illustrate how weird he becomes because he has to deal with SpongeBob. Culture shock. To drum up business at the Krusty Krab, Squidward volunteers to host a talent show featuring acts from around Bikini Bottom, and Mr. Krabs agrees so his daughter Pearl can be a star. As they're preparing, SpongeBob asks what kind of act he can do, and Squidward, hoping to get him to stop bothering him, tells him that his act is to mop up afterwards. The other acts consist of Pearl shaking the entire building with a cheer routine, Gary reading poetry, and Plankton trying to steal a Krabby Patty with magic. As the whole show has been underwhelming, Squidward attempts to save the day with interpretive dance, which only raises money because people are throwing tomatoes from the salad bar. In the end, it's SpongeBob cleaning the tomatoes off the stage that finally gets the crowd excited, specifically SpongeBob and not Squidward. Squidward begins the episode pointing out that the people of Bikini Bottom have no cultural knowledge, and by the end of the episode, he's proven right because they applaud SpongeBob for mopping the floor while not applauding any of the other acts. Not that they were really worth applauding. Maybe SpongeBob's bubble tap dancing or his absorbency freak show could have gotten a better reaction, but Squidward wanted the night to be about himself and no one else, so he kept rejecting routines until it was just mopping. Squidward's ego literally takes center stage in this episode as he takes over the entire show, reworking it into an opening for his self-congratulatory dance routine. The reason SpongeBob is able to stay so relevant is because it introduced a young generation to such archetypes through characters who, while unlikable, are still entertaining to watch. As such, when we see those egocentric directors or attention hogs later in life, we recognize them as Squidwards, and then we're able to laugh at their personalities instead of just being frustrated. You don't have a bad boss, you have a Mr. Krabs. You don't have an annoying neighbor, you have a SpongeBob. And you don't have a loser friend who nevertheless always tries to offer other people advice, but you have a Patrick. Fun. After another foiled attempt at stealing a Krabby Patty, leaving Plankton shunned and dejected, SpongeBob suggests that the only reason Plankton is so evil is because he has no friends. So he visits the chum bucket to hang out, with Plankton rejecting him until Karen, his computer wife, suggests that he pretend to be SpongeBob's friend to get closer to the Krabby Patty formula. Plankton agrees and SpongeBob takes him jellyfishing, where Plankton doesn't get the appeal until SpongeBob sings him the F.U.N song. Plankton finally understands what it means to have fun, and the next day he arrives at the Krusty Krab to hang out with SpongeBob. But Mr. Krabs suspects he's just scheming to get closer to the formula, proven right when he steals a Krabby Patty before going to the movies. Plankton and SpongeBob prepare to watch a film together when Mr. Krabs urges him to check Plankton's pockets, where he finds the patty and proof Plankton's ways never changed. Despite pleading that he has changed, Plankton then admits he hasn't, being evil's too much fun, and he charges into a concrete wall. SpongeBob hopes to teach Plankton the meaning of fun and succeeds in doing this, as Plankton's stated motive by the end of the episode is that being evil is fun. Sure, going to the movies with a friend and frolicking through the flowers is also fun, but Plankton's not going to give up his other hobbies because of all of that. This is what makes him a compelling antagonist to follow. He's not just trying to keep his business afloat by stealing a Krabby Patty for the formula, he's trying to have fun while doing it. And if he can have fun stealing from Mr. Krabs, then we can have fun watching it. Pragmatically, you could probably just pay someone to buy him a patty or have one delivered to another address, but this makes for bad television, so Plankton won't do it. Good antagonists, no, good characters, always have some flair for the dramatic. MuscleBob BuffPants. Sandy offers to help SpongeBob work out as his routine of lifting stuffed animals doesn't show results. Hoping to get beefy quick, he agrees, only to learn that her routine is far too intense for his spongy body. That night, he sees a commercial for Anchor Arms, inflatable rubber arms that will make anyone look muscular. He buys these and inflates them, walking around the muscle beach and showing off his gains. Everyone is impressed, even Sandy, and she tells him that he ought to show off his newfound strength in an anchor tossing competition. She signs him up as he's too weak to stop her, and he worries that he'll soon be revealed as a fraud. SpongeBob attempts to toss his anchor anyway, but can't even pick it up without injuring himself and blowing up his arms. As a punishment for lying, Sandy makes him work out for real, this time with a more simple routine of pressing the button on the remote. Season 1 SpongeBob still had a bit of a crush on Sandy, though even by the halfway point of the season, this was already transforming from romantic inclinations to a sort of envy of her life. She was a scientist, he was a fry cook. She's got muscles, he's got twigs. So SpongeBob is hoping to be more like her by looking more like her, having the muscles but not wanting to put in the effort to get them. That is to say, he cares more about looking tough than about being tough. When people care more about appearances than about honest effort, they almost always resort to the same thing, lying. SpongeBob lies about his routine, he lies about his arms, and he lies about his capabilities. Someone like Sandy, who earned her muscles, wouldn't think to do this and wouldn't see a problem in signing SpongeBob up for a contest of strength, assuming he would revel in the chance to show off his abilities, not just his looks. If given a choice between looking strong and being strong, or looking smart versus being smart, posting pictures of places you've been online versus actually experiencing the place or whatever, some people would pick aesthetics over substance, and they will always be called out by those with actual appreciation of the hobby or medium, meaning you can never really fake your way into acceptance. Squidward, the Unfriendly Ghost. SpongeBob and Patrick are tossing a clamshell around when they throw it into Squidward's open window, hitting a wax statue of the guy. Thinking it's the real Squidward, they try to repair the damage only to melt the statue in the sun, believing they've killed him. Squidward then returns from a bath in his robe with SpongeBob and Patrick, thinking he's a ghost, as they beg for mercy. Squidward plays along, exploiting their fear to make them do chores for him and act like slaves, but while cleaning out his closet, they discover the story of the Flying Dutchman, who haunted the living because he was never properly buried. So they try to bury Squidward, even throwing a funeral for the guy, before he reveals he was never dead and he just wants the whole thing called off. SpongeBob assumes this means he's in denial about being dead, so he blows a bubble big enough to carry Squidward to the surface, where he gets harassed by seagulls. I could talk more about the episode itself, but the basic details of the plot are similar to what's been seen before. Squidward tries to get SpongeBob and Patrick to be less annoying, this backfires, they hurt him even more. Instead, I'll mention Squidward's career as an artist is one of a man who is genuinely multi-talented and just surrounded by those who don't get it. Sometimes, at least. It's very inconsistent, whether Squidward is a talented performer and artist, or if he's a delusional amateur who only believes he's talented because he has no one to compare himself to. Here, Squidward's managed to create a representation of himself in a variety of mediums inside of a studio in his house, which is impressive merely for the fact that he's got a baseline level of competence in so many fields. I'm sure his music's also about himself too. As usual, his real skill level varies based on whatever is funniest, but sometimes whatever is funniest is for him to make a perfectly realistic wax statue of himself. One of the reasons why Squidward's artistry works in spite of the wide variance in his abilities is the fact that he has ego. His failures and successes are interchangeable because he can't recognize qualities that he sees in everything. The Chaperone. Pearl is crying over her prom date flaking on her, so Mr. Krabs orders SpongeBob to take her to prom, despite him being nothing like her long, tan, and handsome ex. He gives himself a makeover, including fake leg extensions, and shows up with Pearl not excited because she just wants the day over with, giving him a checklist of activities to perform before the end of the night. At the dance hall, SpongeBob proceeds to embarrass her with how clumsy his legs make him, ruining the event by destroying everything around him. Eventually, it's SpongeBob who breaks down in tears as his prom day was ruined too, so Pearl offers him one last dance as they do the sponge together, destroying the rest of the hall and injuring all their classmates until they're kicked out by an angry mob. Pearl admits she knew the date was going to be a disaster, and Mr. Krabs thanks him for trying his best anyway, only for SpongeBob to take back his body double. SpongeBob and Pearl both have unrealistic expectations for their time at the prom, with SpongeBob starting out by admitting he didn't even go to his high school prom, as Pearl has a massive list of things she wants to do, while already deciding she isn't going to enjoy herself anyway. It's only by ruining everything that they realize it's not about conforming to the long, tan, and handsome archetype like everyone else, but doing what you think is fun. And this extends outside of Bikini Bottom. We don't like SpongeBob because the show is like every other cartoon of its era, or that SpongeBob's a typical cartoon protagonist. We enjoy the show because it is so unlike everything else. SpongeBob is kind of a loser, but he's a loser in a relatable way, and it doesn't affect his outlook on life, which is a mentality that anyone can aspire to have. Employee of the Month. Judging for Employee of the Month is coming up, and SpongeBob's convinced he'll win like he always does. Squidward tells him that the award is meaningless, just a way of manipulating SpongeBob into working harder for free. But SpongeBob refuses to listen, assuming Squidward is just trying to psych him out so he can win. Convinced his neighbor's out to get him, SpongeBob stakes out overnight to destroy Squidward's alarm clock, making him sleep in and miss the day. But Squidward catches him, revealing even more, and when SpongeBob says that Squidward wouldn't have won anyway, he sets out to prove his coworker wrong. They then wake up early, racing to the Krusty Krab to fight one another as to who can do the most before they open. After a fake truce, they rush the front doors and begin cleaning so hard they wreck up the place. This culminates in trying to outproduce each other at the grill and blowing up the restaurant, with Mr. Krabs lamenting everyone passing by is eating for free. Squidward never had any interest in being the Employee of the Month until SpongeBob suggested he wasn't good enough to make it. Before that, he recognized what it was, a crude attempt to make employees work harder for the sake of validation, rather than actually giving them more money. It's like a company throwing a pizza party as a reward for reaching a sales goal instead of splitting their record profits with anyone other than the shareholders. But Squidward isn't motivated by trying to impress Mr. Krabs, he's motivated by trying to show up SpongeBob. It's a common coping mechanism for people to not try at all to avoid failure. You don't succeed, but you tell yourself you might have if you tried harder. When SpongeBob calls out this behavior as a lack of talent, Squidward has to defend himself by beating SpongeBob, by trying to beat SpongeBob. Sometimes we're more motivated to prove a person wrong than we are to prove ourselves right. Scaredy Pants. Tired of being laughed at because he's so easy to scare, SpongeBob decides to turn the tables on Halloween night by dressing as the ghost of the Flying Dutchman. He has Patrick shave his head to appear more ghost-like, and the duo heads to the Krusty Krab to spook people at a party. Despite a strong start, SpongeBob is dropped by Patrick and everyone laughs at him once more. Then the real Flying Dutchman appears, angry people are poorly impersonating him, and he prepares to harvest their souls. Except before he starts, he takes off SpongeBob's costume, revealing that when Patrick shaved him, he shaved off all of SpongeBob's skin. A Halloween episode that was never rerun as often as the others and only really saw repeat showings during the holiday season. As a result, it's far less memed than others, though being an early season SpongeBob episode, that still means a lot of memes. What is unlike the rest of the early season episodes, though, probably has to do more with the vibe of the episode. Sure, some differences to be expected on a holiday episode, but that only goes so far. The best episodes of SpongeBob tend to be those that focus on a core group of the main cast, with minor characters only existing to be played off of, rather than as instigators. Although, this is contradicted by the first voiced appearance of the Flying Dutchman, who has since become a staple of the regular series. I was a teenage Gary. Squidward volunteers to watch Gary over a long weekend so SpongeBob and Patrick will leave him alone, but he forgets to actually feed the snail and Gary grows weak and feeble, with SpongeBob calling a doctor upon his return to diagnose the issue. This doctor gives SpongeBob snail plasma to rehydrate, and Squidward has to deliver the dose as he feels guilty for abandoning the animal. But SpongeBob is too squeamish and takes the plasma instead, as it's revealed that Gary was just thirsty. A bit later, SpongeBob begins to act like a snail, and then he transforms into one, asking Squidward for help but only managing to slowly crawl forward and meow. Squidward is so afraid of this mutated SpongeBob that he runs off, accidentally injecting himself and transforming into a snail as well, much to the annoyance of Patrick, who's kept up all night by meowing. A second part to the Halloween episode, this one being more horrifying than the first part, despite being less overtly related to the holiday. It accomplishes this by being a pastiche of other horror flicks, down to the naming scheme, and then replacing the characters and their actions with whatever might be more appropriate for an underwater setting. A criticism of the later seasons comes from some of the random gross-out scenes, but that's a trend established even as early as now. The issue, then, must have far more to do with execution than it does the actual content of the gags. Maybe it's just the expectation that this is a Halloween episode and therefore, it's okay to be a bit different, even edgy, because it's been justified. SB129. Squidward hides from SpongeBob and Patrick inside of the Krusty Krabs' freezer so he won't have to go jellyfishing with them. He ends up frozen in there for 2,000 years, waking up to a chrome future where robotic versions of SpongeBob and Patrick are still existing. He then uses the time machine in the hallway to go back to the past, only to find a primitive version of his neighbors there anyway, teaching them to jellyfish so they'll leave him alone. Once he's finally able to play his clarinet in peace, the cave fish get upset by the noise and chase him back into the time machine, which breaks. Squidward is then transported to a white void outside of time, finally alone, with nothing but effects, which freak him out even more. He breaks into the floor and wishes to go back to his time, right in front of SpongeBob and Patrick, who ask him if he wants to go jellyfishing, the sport he invented. SpongeBob SquarePants can best be described as an absurdist comedy. Jokes are rarely grounded in reality, and even basic things like logic are tossed out in favor of whatever's funny. It's not about how quickly the show can go from 0 to 100, but how quickly it can go back to 0 afterwards, like nothing's out of the ordinary. This is Squidward's first focus episode, and he's the usual straight man character to SpongeBob and Patrick, so this episode has to amplify the absurdity to give him something other than the characters to play off of. Sure, SpongeBob and Patrick still exist to a degree, but as their futuristic or prehistoric versions of themselves, the audience views them more so through the lens of how the characters have changed. This has the effect that the Squidward-focused episode is focused mostly on Squidward, a roundabout way of ensuring everything still works. Karate Choppers. SpongeBob and Sandy are playing karate, ambushing each other in public over and over. Paranoid, SpongeBob starts to suspect that some of the customers in the Krusty Krab are working with Sandy, and when he attacks them instead of finishing their orders, Mr. Krabs tells him to give up karate, or he's fired. With Sandy realizing this isn't just a ploy to have her lower her guard, they attempt to find some other hobby they can do together other than karate. During a picnic at the park, they start karate chopping their food before making a bunch of sandwiches, as they realize they just can't quit. Mr. Krabs catches the two in the act, but instead of firing SpongeBob, he realizes he can monetize the hobby, and he brings Sandy into the restaurant to show off. Karate is, in this episode, a metaphor. A metaphor for what exactly? You probably already have an idea in your mind. But you probably have a few other theories too. This is one of the strengths of SpongeBob SquarePants. It makes episodes about a niche subject related to underwater life or the hobbies of one of its characters. Then, it tells a story that isn't explicitly about the hobby, enabling any viewer to relate to the story regardless of whether they share that hobby specifically. So a karate episode is actually about whatever it is that you can't stop doing, whether it's two kids in school who keep getting in trouble for a running joke, or whatever you thought of. The end of the episode shows Mr. Krabs at his most pragmatic. He dislikes karate, not because it's poisoning SpongeBob's mind, but because poisoning SpongeBob's mind hurts his bottom line. Once he realizes a way to monetize SpongeBob's addiction, he considers it workplace appropriate. Sleepy time. SpongeBob crashes a car in his dream and leaves his nighttime thought bubble, deciding to take a detour back to his own dreams to see what his friends and neighbors are dreaming of. Gary is dreaming about being well-read and well-spoken. Patrick's dreaming about doing nothing. Squidward is dreaming of performing in front of royalty. Sandy about skydiving. Pearl, a tea party. Mr. Krabs fishing for money. And Plankton about destroying Bikini Bottom. After messing with everybody's dreams, SpongeBob returns to his own, where in the waking world, everybody is upset that he's bothering them, even while they sleep. This far into the first season, the main cast now has enough development that they can have their dreams explored without anything being surprising, and if it is, then it's an intentional gag. Consider if the very first episode has SpongeBob view Gary's dream and see him well-spoken. We might assume this is normal for his character. But 30 episodes in, it's an actual subversion of the half season of meowing, so the gag lands. The rest of these are pretty straightforward. Patrick lacking the imagination for a great dream, Sandy dreaming about the sort of thing she does while awake, and a short gag about Mr. Krabs very briefly being confused for his daughter. Aside from that, the only real exception seems to be from SpongeBob entering Squidward's dream and then applying Sponge logic to the rules of his world. Even in Squidward's dreams, SpongeBob can annoy him. Suds. SpongeBob leaves the freezer open overnight and wakes up shivering, concerned he might have the suds. After being sent home by Mr. Krabs, he calls Sandy for a ride to the doctor's. But Patrick gets there first, warning SpongeBob that the doctor is a scary place, offering to treat him instead. His methods are questionable as he tries random things to make SpongeBob look better instead of be better, but eventually Sandy shows up to take SpongeBob to the doctor for real. In their fight over the inflated sponge, SpongeBob gets lost and he rolls over to the Krusty Krab, destroying it with all his backed up sneezes. In the end, SpongeBob's given a proper doctor's visit that cures him, as a jealous Patrick is given a less favorable cure. This episode takes us to an evolution of Patrick's usual role in a story. He's dumb, but SpongeBob doesn't know he's dumb, so he ends up getting hurt because he believes what Patrick is saying. This is compared to Sandy, who knows Patrick's unqualified to do just about anything, so she rushes over to stop him from any continued harm against his patient. Patrick often hurts the people around him, mostly SpongeBob, not out of maliciousness, but because of the people around him actually believing him. This makes a cycle of feedback where Patrick believes he's qualified because SpongeBob trusts him, resulting in SpongeBob on a torture rack without question because he hasn't questioned anything else thus far. Valentine's Day. SpongeBob is handing out Valentines for the holiday, saving the best one for his best friend Patrick, which involves Sandy in a hot air balloon greeting him while they're at the park. Everything's going according to plan as Patrick excitedly hypes up his impending gift, until Sandy's accosted by flying, chocolate-eating clams who delay her arrival. So SpongeBob resorts to Plan B, a handshake. Patrick is so upset by this handshake when everyone else got great things, he begins trying to destroy the park, only for Sandy to get there at the last moment. After everyone convinces Patrick to turn around, he immediately cheers up and then pops the balloon. Another one of those holiday episodes that had less of a presence in meme culture due to the fact that it didn't get rerun as often as the other episodes of this season. The one scene that has really permeated the bubble, though, comes from Patrick's disappointed reaction to his handshake, and the difference here illustrates a point about cultural relevance. The more often something is repeated, the more likely it is to catch on. This episode wasn't aired as often, so most of the jokes don't get remembered, but the one gag that was repeated several times managed to catch on to a far greater degree than had it been a single shot of Patrick staring at his hand. The paper. Squidward dumps a piece of wrapping paper on SpongeBob's lawn and demands that SpongeBob stop trying to return it after his neighbor keeps trying to. Squidward then listens to SpongeBob have a lot of fun with this scrap of paper, growing jealous and trying to one-up the guy's antics, before eventually begging to have it back by trading everything he owns. Once successful, Squidward realizes that it is just a scrap of paper, then Patrick comes by and throws it in the garbage. This episode begins as a retooling of the plot from Reef Blower, where Squidward's attempts to lazily dismiss a problem escalates into SpongeBob causing him trouble. It ends as another familiar plot from a later season, Idiot Box, where Squidward gets jealous over a seemingly innocuous hobby to the point of obsession. But while that plot ended differently, this one shows Squidward as properly disappointed with his one-sided trait to SpongeBob. SpongeBob has an active imagination and can come up with a bunch of different ways to play with a piece of paper. Squidward could only come up with derivative versions of SpongeBob's games. The premise is not that Squidward wants SpongeBob's paper, he just wants SpongeBob's sense of wonder at the world, and that's something he can't trade for. Arrgh. Mr. Krabs becomes obsessed with the board game, The Flying Dutchman's Treasure Hunt, and he keeps trying to get his employees to play it. The next day, he asks them if they want to go on a real treasure hunt, and they excitedly agree, learning lessons about how to be a better pirate, as well as which direction is west, and what it means to be loyal. After sneaking into Krabs' tent and learning that his treasure map was just the map from their board game, he argues with them, ending when they discover the big red X and they dig up the Dutchman's treasure. But as they fight over this treasure, they wake up the real Dutchman who threatens the one who touched his booty. Get it? Mr. Krabs blames the others, and they're rewarded with 2 gold doubloons, while Mr. Krabs is given a plastic treasure chest based on a real treasure chest. Mr. Krabs spends the episode demanding loyalty from his crew right up until the point where he is expected to reciprocate that loyalty. Then he drops pretenses of them being in it together to avoid all responsibility. It's an interestingly nuanced depiction of actual greed, Krabs' defining characteristic, as he's not merely obsessed with getting as much money as possible, but instead trying to make an argument that he himself is more valuable than the others. He wants loyalty, but doesn't want to give it away, viewing his presence as equally valuable to SpongeBob's subservience. To SpongeBob's credit, this episode has him the most resistant to Mr. Krabs' personality, whereas in later seasons, he gleefully accepts most of the abuse levied his way. SpongeBob is the one who tells him off for obsessing over a board game instead of going to sleep, and SpongeBob is the one who first stands up to his hypocrisy when he demands the full share of the treasure. Rock Bottom. SpongeBob and Patrick board the wrong bus on their way out of Glove World, ending up in the creepy, deep-sea city of Rock Bottom. While looking for a way out, Patrick gets on the first bus while SpongeBob gets left behind. He continuously misses the next several buses out of the city as they only seem to come when he's distracted, and soon he demands answers, only to wait in line and learn he'll be there overnight. As he's panicking over distant footsteps, he's cornered where it's revealed these steps were a friendly passerby returning his balloon, filling it with air, and letting SpongeBob glide back home. SpongeBob spends a whole episode stranded in an unfamiliar location with all the anxieties of the unknown manifesting to really sell the horror of the plotline. It's one thing to be in a foreign country, but another to be in a foreign area with no knowledge of the language or ability to tell how the basic things around you function, like the transit or what signs say. SpongeBob tries to escape the place by using rules as he understands them, which, he doesn't, and finds himself no closer to leaving by nightfall as he was after arriving. It's not until he relies on something more universal that he does escape, that of a stranger offering a favor, something SpongeBob never tried to do because he was too afraid of people just because they looked and spoke differently. Texas. Sandy starts acting homesick, not wanting to spend time with SpongeBob or Patrick. They misinterpret this as wanting to go back to her Treedome until hearing her sing about Texas and realizing what she actually wants. So they throw a Texas-themed party for her at the Krusty Krab, but before they can get her there, she tries to leave the ocean. Unable to get her to return without ruining the surprise, SpongeBob and Patrick realize they can lure her closer by insulting Texas, which they do as they run to the Krusty Krab, arriving just in time to reveal how underwhelming the party was due to none of the fish knowing anything about Texas. She tells them it's not about the theme, but about being surrounded by those closest to you, then realizes that she already is. Sandy's characterization is that she is a fish out of water. Not literally, of course, as she is the sole outsider among the rest of Bikini Bottom due to being from anywhere other than the ocean. Yet while Sandy is the species most familiar to the audience, she never really gets used as an audience surrogate for any of the development of the setting. It would make sense if, for example, every time SpongeBob tried to explain some underwater tradition, he did so by telling Sandy all about it, as it would make sense for her not to know and it wouldn't pull the audience out of the experience by using her for exposition. But she isn't. Sandy, more often, is the one to introduce some foreign element to the setting, often through some kind of technology or a habit of the land dwellers, while SpongeBob is the one who is introduced to the concept along with the audience. This shows the strength of the characterization in SpongeBob, that the most familiar character to the audience is behaviorally the most alien, whereas we all relate to the talking sponge. Walking small. Plankton tries to clear out Goo Lagoon to build a second location for the chum bucket, but because he is small, all the fish ignore him. So he finds SpongeBob and plots to have that guy clear the beach for him with assertiveness lessons. SpongeBob fails to be assertive enough to make any space though, and soon Plankton gets depressed and gives up. But SpongeBob gives it one more chance and manages to be so annoying that everyone goes home, at which point Plankton starts to clear the beach for construction. Realizing that he was used for land development, SpongeBob teaches Plankton the value of being aggressively nice, and he returns the beach to how it was as Plankton crawls away disgusted by the niceness. Plankton's strategy in this episode was to teach SpongeBob to be more assertive and alpha male in his behavior, his own words, knowing that this is the best way to drive everyone off without the person scaring folks away thinking they've done anything wrong. Acting tough and aggressive is great at making people want to spend less time with you, often giving you what you want out of a desire to make the social interaction end as quickly as possible. As a bonus for guys like Plankton, a majority of his teachings result in no material change for the student. SpongeBob goes from being ignored by everyone to being ignored by everyone, just more actively, so it's easy for somebody easy to manipulate to be convinced that they simply haven't become assertive enough. Effectively, this episode is about Plankton becoming a manosphere podcaster, convincing his audience of 1, that all of his social issues are the fault of those around him, all in the interest of developing a business. It just happens to be a restaurant chain instead of a dietary supplement. Fools in April. Squidward asks SpongeBob not to involve him in any of his April Fool's Day pranks because he finds his neighbor more annoying than usual on the holiday. Although SpongeBob agrees, Squidward is still annoyed by the sound of him pranking others, so Squidward plans on getting him back with a prank of his own. The customers agree that this Rube Goldberg machine took things too far as SpongeBob runs off crying. Squidward attempts to apologize but can't get the words out, eventually having his conscience get too heavy as he pleads for forgiveness, with SpongeBob revealing that pretending to be hurt by the prank was his own April Fool's joke. Squidward dislikes April Fool's Day and never wants to participate and therefore is bad at participating when he finally does try to partake. His prank is well set up, but he lacks the ability to know when to hold back versus which potential target. You wouldn't pull the same prank on a random person as you would a close friend. SpongeBob, on the other hand, is more experienced than Squidward when it comes to April Fools, and is able to recognize that Squidward doesn't want to be pranked. He agrees to stop because Squidward asks nicely. So narratively, this is an episode where Squidward gets into trouble by attempting to do something he's not good at, pranking, while getting out of trouble by doing something he's equally not good at, apologizing. SpongeBob recognizes this, but also recognizes that by having Squidward pull a prank on him, he's now fair game to retaliate against. Neptune's Spatula. SpongeBob pulls King Neptune's spatula out of a pile of grease in a museum and is rewarded with becoming the new royal fry cook. But King Neptune doesn't think a tiny sponge is worthy of the honor, so he has SpongeBob prove himself by competing in a cook-off for that honor. Although Neptune manages to hit the 1,000 burger mark in the time it takes SpongeBob to make a single patty, the audience finds his food gross, while SpongeBob's is so tasty, Neptune agrees to make him his new cook anyway. SpongeBob refuses the honor when he learns that he'll have to leave his old life behind, offering instead to teach Neptune to cook. From early in the series, SpongeBob has been characterized as someone with very low ambition. He wants to be a fry cook, and he values some things others look down on. And yet, the thing that keeps him relatable and likable is the fact that he does these very simple things with the same enthusiasm one might bring to a bigger ambition. SpongeBob doesn't just want to be a fry cook, he wants to be the best fry cook he can be. It doesn't matter what you do, it matters how you do it. So it's not a surprise that he would pull the golden spatula out of the grease pile to anyone but Neptune himself, who views people as what they are instead of who they are. This is further highlighted by the cook-off, as Neptune creates all of his burgers with magic, never touching the food himself, and producing the burgers with as little contact as possible. SpongeBob is personally involved in every single step, meaning he has far better quality control and a deeper relationship to the food that he values. The difference between quality and slop is whether the end product is viewed from the lens of a creator or just a consumer. Hooky. It's fishing season, and Bikini Bottom is overrun by hooks, which Mr. Krabs warns SpongeBob are dangerous. But Patrick disagrees, convincing SpongeBob to spend the day riding the hooks to the surface and jumping off. SpongeBob has a great time with this until Mr. Krabs comes by, scolding him not just for skipping work, but for playing with something so risky and dangerous. SpongeBob tells Mr. Krabs that he's been scared straight, until the next morning when he sees another hook hanging and he rides it. But this one hooks SpongeBob, and he runs to Krabs for help in getting unhooked. Krabs tells him that the only way is to remove the hooked clothing, which he reluctantly does after some back and forth, eventually humiliating himself in front of Pearl and her friends. The hooks in this episode are, like karate from Karate Choppers, a metaphor for something else. Though also like that episode, the metaphor can extend to anything that's harmful but fun, from actual addictive substances to things as simple as procrastinating on a project. If you're procrastinating on a project, this video will reach a natural break point in about 2 minutes if you need it. SpongeBob and Patrick have fun, but it's a type of fun dependent on a very close window of timing, that if you mess up a little bit on your hook dosage, you end up in a tuna can. This is an example of survivorship bias, where the fish who don't let go in time are not around to warn others about what happens to those who hold on too tight. Since all the fish in Bikini Bottom have never experienced being caught by a fisherman, this makes the hobby seem safer than it really is. But Mr. Krabs knows better than to trust the experiences exclusively of those who have had a good time, so he arranges for SpongeBob to have a bad time, at least a safe time as well though. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 2. SpongeBob wins the Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy conch signal in a contest, immediately blowing it and calling over the heroic duo, who warn him only to use it in a real emergency. SpongeBob continuously calls them over for minor things until Barnacle Boy gets upset and confiscates the conch to destroy it, though Mermaid Man offers to take SpongeBob around town for one last joyride so he won't be too heartbroken. As SpongeBob continues to annoy them both, they plan to ditch the guy at a diner before getting kidnapped by the dirty Bubble. When SpongeBob asks the Bubble for an autograph, he pops the villain, saving the heroes and getting one more ride in the invisible boatmobile as a reward. At first, Mermaid Man is okay with SpongeBob abusing the use of the conch, as there's far less evil afoot these days than there used to be while the heroes were in their prime, so the excuse that they have to stay constantly vigilant doesn't hold up so well. All SpongeBob wanted was to spend more time with his heroes, and these heroes admit they're also pretty lonely these days. So they take SpongeBob out for a limited time, as although they need him to get out more, they still find the kid annoying, and then they plan to ditch him once he's gotten his hero worship out of the system. However, it is this obnoxious hero worship that saves them in the end, as his desire to get an autograph from their villains gallery pops the dirty Bubble. As Mermaid Man considers SpongeBob to be a potential hero of the next generation, this proves his idea right, that it's time for the two of them to step back from the spotlight, not to wait around for others to take their place, but to start preparing others to take their place. Others like SpongeBob. Your shoes untied. Patrick gets a new pair of shoes and SpongeBob volunteers to teach him to tie them, only to realize he doesn't know how because his shoes have always been tied by default. After faking his way out of the lesson and getting a night's rest, he realizes he still doesn't know how, and when he tries to work with untied shoes, he drops so many Krabby Patties that Mr. Krabs kicks him out for the lost business. SpongeBob runs around asking anybody he can find how to tie shoes, only to learn that nobody, not even the Flying Dutchman, even wears shoes. Finally, he drags himself home where Gary reveals his perfect shoes, playing a song by F.U.N about loop-de-loops. SpongeBob is revealed not to know how to tie his shoes as he's never had to do so before, nor has he ever needed to show someone else how to do it or watch them tie their own, as undersea creatures don't wear shoes. Or pants for that matter. SpongeBob having square pants on is unusual, not just for the shape, I mean he's square-shaped, but the fact that they are pants. It raises the question as to why Patrick bought a pair of shoes in the first place. The end song then teaches SpongeBob to do a loop-de-loop and pull, which, while catchy, is far from a complete lesson on how to actually tie a shoe. It's one of those things that is difficult to show in animation, precise finger motion. So there's more of a spectacle to it than substance, not that that was the point anyway. Squid's Day Off. Mr. Krabs loses his arms trying to retrieve a dime from the drain, getting hit on the head so hard he is hospitalized. He puts Squidward in charge while he recovers, and because it's a slow workday, Squidward decides to take the rest of the day off. He does this by promoting SpongeBob to take over the register as he pretends to do some errands. But while Squidward is trying to relax, he keeps fantasizing about various ways SpongeBob might destroy the store, rushing back to nothing but questions about whether he's finished with those errands. Eventually, Squidward's paranoia sees him hallucinating his coworker, and he rushes back nude to the store, where SpongeBob points out that the open sign was flipped to closed, and they could have taken the whole day off. Squidward spends the whole episode paranoid over the responsibility that he is running away from, put in charge of the restaurant, and then immediately showing that he's either very good management material or very bad management material, as he obsesses over hypotheticals in a way a helicopter boss might. As before, we see that Squidward really does care about his job, but only when put into context of him proving he is good at it. If someone places trust in the guy, he has to prove them right for trusting him or wrong for doubting, so he winds up overthinking everything he does, as a small mistake not only means he is bad at his job, but everyone who claimed he was right. Everything that happened in this episode was entirely in Squidward's head, but then again, it was always going to be. Management is usually about putting out fires before they happen. Something smells. As he is out of ice cream, SpongeBob improvises a sundae out of whatever's lying around. This makes his breath so bad that when he greets Bikini Bottom, everybody runs away. Patrick suggests that the cause of this is that SpongeBob is very ugly, and the two work through a few ways to boost SpongeBob's confidence up enough so that he can leave the house again. This results in a trip to the theater, where Patrick empties the place by making them look at it. Later on, a hungry Patrick eats the leftover sundae, and his breath makes SpongeBob realize the true reason everyone ran away: the two of them stink. Patrick is once again the well-intentioned but harmful friend to SpongeBob, at once convincing him he is so ugly that he's going to ugly Barnacle everyone close to him, but at the same time, spending time with his friend with the plan to rebuild his confidence. A lot of the reactions of those around SpongeBob are interpreted through whatever SpongeBob believes the truth is. At first he assumes that people are running away from him because they are behind schedule or in a rush. Then, he thinks they're fleeing his ugliness, and for a time even assumes they're giving up seats because of politeness, because of how high his self-esteem is. People interpret the actions of those around them not according to the truth, but what they believe the truth is. Then these reactions reinforce their belief about themselves, making them believe it even harder. Bossy Boots. Mr. Krabs hires Pearl to run the Krusty Krab over the summer, with the idea that she'll make a few changes to attract younger customers. These changes result in a rebranding to the Cuddly Krab, with new pink costumes and the menu change to only have salads. Squidward hates the outfits, SpongeBob hates the menu, and Mr. Krabs hates that it's losing him money. so he asks SpongeBob to fire his daughter so he doesn't have to. Fortunately, Pearl confesses to SpongeBob that she's been trying to get fired on purpose, so he compromises by fake firing her in front of his boss, with the junk Pearl bot being sold to SpongeBob in exchange for a year's pay. Every character here is motivated by something that they don't get in the episode, and because they were searching for something different out of the restaurant's changes, they failed to acknowledge that everyone else was also disappointed. Squidward was hoping that he and SpongeBob could take advantage of Pearl's lack of management experience to get their way more often, only for Pearl to have SpongeBob on her side, ruining the hopes for a union. SpongeBob wanted to be more hip, so he went along with changes he didn't understand, only to learn that being hip in this case meant throwing away who he is. Mr. Krabs wanted his daughter to learn how to run the family business, but then she made so many changes, it wasn't even the same restaurant run as before. Finally, Pearl herself just wanted to spend time with her friends, so she revamped the restaurant based on when her friends would want to visit, rather than a general audience. People went along with the changes as they assumed someone was benefiting from the arrangement, and therefore, it was worthless to fight back against the will of a crowd. Big Pink Loser. Patrick gets an award meant for SpongeBob by mistake and gets jealous that his friend is so accomplished while he is not. So SpongeBob tries to help Patrick do literally anything instead of nothing all day, by going to the Krusty Krab to work. Patrick fails at everything as SpongeBob scales back the tasks, only ending when he walks Patrick through the process of opening a jar. The next day, Patrick is so happy about his jar-opening achievement, he begins mimicking SpongeBob in everything he does. Sick of being impersonated, SpongeBob starts to act like Patrick until he receives an award. But this award was addressed to Patrick instead of SpongeBob, a reward for doing nothing longer than anyone else. In the first season, Patrick's character was a well-intentioned but ultimately dangerous guy, as his lack of knowledge got those around him in trouble. Yet even as early as the end of this season, Patrick started to be characterized less by his lack of practical knowledge and more by a far simple implementation of this idea. He's just stupid and lazy. So this episode about Patrick failing to find an identity is less about him in universe as it is about Patrick in the larger narrative. He's in between two different changing personalities and varies a lot depending on who's writing the episode, shifting from the guy SpongeBob goes to for bad advice to the guy whose ineptitude constantly endangers his friends. One of his attempts at finding an identity comes from imitating SpongeBob, who's also changed personalities from a guy who struggled to find work as a fry cook to an accomplished and celebrated individual with a closet full of trophies. In the first episode, SpongeBob is deemed too annoying to give a job to, while by the end of the first season, he was impressing a literal god with his Krabby Patties. By the end of this episode, Patrick is rewarded for doing nothing, as if to cement that his character is now a lazy idiot, and he's recognized for this. Bubble Buddy. As all of his friends are busy on Leif Erikson Day, SpongeBob makes his own friend, Bubble Buddy. He and Bubble Buddy travel around Bikini Bottom, forcing Squidward to provide excellent service and then tipping him bubble money, heading to Goo Lagoon and holding up the line at the bathroom, insulting all of the bodybuilders, and making a fish experience high tide. Finally getting enough people angry at his bubbly antics that they form an angry mob led by Squidward with the goal to pop the bubble. They throw SpongeBob out of the way only for Bubble Buddy to defend himself from Squidward's needle, as he decides to leave Bikini Bottom as things are too dangerous now. It's interesting that Bubble Buddy was so reviled by those around Bikini Bottom when all he really did was sit there, SpongeBob interpreting all of his silence and stillness in a way that people hated. It's not really Bubble Buddy that they wanted to pop, but SpongeBob himself. Yet, stabbing one of your neighbors is harder to convince an angry mob to do than it is to convince them to pop an inanimate object. Nothing Bubble Buddy ever did was more annoying than what SpongeBob usually does, yet they're okay with popping him until he personally objects. Then they don't want to kill the bubble because he's just another guy like they are. Dying for pie. Squidward hasn't made a gift for SpongeBob on Employee Brotherhood Day, so to get Mr. Krabs to stop bothering him, he buys the guy a pie from pirates. Despite warnings from the pirates, they're actually pie-shaped bombs. After leaving this pie on Mr. Krabs' desk, it goes missing and they assume SpongeBob's eaten it. So Squidward decides to make SpongeBob's last day before he explodes a pleasant one by doing whatever he wants. SpongeBob has a long list of silly activities that Squidward goes along with out of guilt, finally watching the sunset together when he hears an explosion. But this was just SpongeBob blowing bubbles as he reveals that he kept the pie so they could share it together, and then he drops it and blows up Bikini Bottom. What Squidward really robbed SpongeBob of in this episode was time. He didn't bother spending time to vet whether the pies were safe, so he tries to make up for it by giving SpongeBob as much of his own time as possible. A running theme with Squidward is that he isn't a bad guy, just perpetually exhausted by SpongeBob's antics. Like a new parent operating on an infant's sleep schedule, he's just too burnt out to make wise choices a lot of the time. Squidward just wants to show up, do his job, go home to his house full of art, and so he cuts corners when it comes to anything beyond the bare minimum. And that's the real difference between the two. SpongeBob fully dedicates himself to his job at the Krusty Krab and his role as a fry cook, while Squidward would never define himself by the labor he performs for money, but the art he does for free. With this context, it's easier to understand why Squidward would act as he does. It isn't malice, but a genuine disinterest in anything he's forced to care about, rather than what he chooses is important to him. Imitation Krabs. Plankton comes up with a new plot to steal the Krabby Patty secret formula by donning a disguise and tricking SpongeBob into giving it up, eventually landing on a disguise of Mr. Krabs himself to have SpongeBob tell him directly. After dismissing Squidward with the promise of a day off and luring Krabs away with the penny, he's left alone with SpongeBob, who tells him to do the secret handshake first. This handshake is a long waste of time with various non-sequitur games, ultimately resulting in nothing. Finally, SpongeBob is about to hand over the formula when the real Mr. Krabs comes back, following the penny, and SpongeBob gives them a quiz at Tartar Point to determine the real Mr. Krabs. SpongeBob chooses wrong and gives the formula to Plankton, only to activate the Crab-bot's self-destruct with the penny the real Krabs was chasing. He retrieves the real Mr. Krabs and apologizes for getting it wrong, but Mr. Krabs says it's fine, as the formula is safe. It's actually a bit telling how, near the end of the episode, SpongeBob interrogates both Mr. Krabses to determine who is the fake by asking them a series of questions about the Krusty Krab itself, with Plankton answering all of them correctly, as Mr. Krabs is too slow. Plankton knows more about the restaurant he is trying to rob than the actual owner, and yet for all the knowledge of the semantics he has, he still fails because of the food's quality, or at least I guess what he assumes is the quality of the food. It's one of those marine biology details in the show. Plankton in real life feed themselves with photosynthesis. They basically eat light. So Plankton's unable to understand why physical food that other fish eat could taste good, crediting it to some sort of secret formula rather than a physical difference in what he consumes. I also like the theory that Mr. Krabs gave SpongeBob this elaborate secret handshake as a means of filtering out any potential imposters. Not because they don't understand the handshake, but because it takes up so much time, Krabs would inevitably catch them in the middle of doing it to stop him from doing anything to damage his business. There is no secret handshake, just a means of buying time before he can lock up the formula again. Wormy. While house-sitting for Sandy, SpongeBob and Patrick become obsessed with her pet, Wormy, playing around all day. Because they don't know what a butterfly is, the next day when they see one in Wormy's jar, they think it's a monster that has eaten their friend. Then they're chased around the Treedome by it. Wormy is then let out, flying to the Krusty Krab and eventually the rest of Bikini Bottom, as SpongeBob and Patrick stay one step ahead, warning everybody of the monster. Eventually, they save the city with an evacuation in time for Sandy to return, where she catches her pet in a jar and everyone celebrates. The entire conflict in this episode comes from what's known as grounding, the idea that a person's first impression of something defines the rest of their knowledge about it, even in the face of contradictory evidence. SpongeBob and Patrick assume that the butterfly ate their friend, so to them, it has the appearance of a carnivorous killer rather than a pleasant pollinator, as most humans would consider it. Their overreaction to this creature causes everyone else to have a first impression of two men screaming in terror from a monster, rather than seeing the truth for themselves. Newsreel footage and scared anchors are what informs the crowd of how they ought to react, and when people react with fear, they don't get the chance to contradict their first impression, driving home the terror of SpongeBob and Patrick even further. Notably, it's Sandy, who has known of Wormy the longest, who's able to defuse the situation, because she didn't even understand there was a situation that needed defusing in the first place. Patty Hype. Business is slow at the Krusty Krab, and Mr. Krabs tries and fails to come up with ways to bring people in. SpongeBob suggests selling colored pretty patties, but just gets laughed at by Squidward and Krabs, eventually leaving on his own to prove that the idea is good. He and Patrick open a pretty patty stand, and business is slow until it starts to spread via word of mouth, with this news reaching the Krusty Krab and making Mr. Krabs jealous. Krabs goes to the stand and offers to buy it from SpongeBob in exchange for the key to the failing Krusty Krab, swapping stores and preparing to rake in cash. But the next day an angry mob shows up at the pretty patty stand, demanding refunds as the patties have dyed them various colors. This episode very subtly starts to interrogate aspects of the show that have always been introduced without question. The Krusty Krab used to be the place where SpongeBob wanted to work, little more than a backdrop for other comedic set pieces to take place. Here, the actual restaurant's success is pointed out as strange. It's shaped like a trap for a crustacean, and the interior is themed underwater. So what's the appeal for a fishy customer? What's also questioned is Mr. Krabs' business acumen. Why is the Krusty Krab successful in spite of any real appeal? It's just a generic restaurant, one run by someone so cheap as to charge for napkins. So where's the hook that gets people in the door? SpongeBob arrives and offers to shake things up, only to get laughed at by his boss, who's struggling for that exact reason. He laughs at the idea of changing things instead of considering it. But things are ironically resolved as Krabs finally buys SpongeBob's business and learns why he is not a business owner otherwise. The patties are untested and unsafe. The Shell Shack's talking dog will eventually stop working as a gimmick, and the Krusty Krab will always be a consistent place with regular customers instead of trend chasers. Grandma's Kisses. SpongeBob gets made fun of at work for having a little lipstick on his forehead from an afternoon with his grandma. So Patrick tells him he must start acting older so his grandma's affection won't embarrass him anymore, and SpongeBob dons a pair of sideburns. The duo then goes to SpongeBob's grandma's house where he tells her he wants to be treated more like an adult, which she agrees to, though Patrick has become obsessed with being babied himself. Watching Patrick get spoiled, SpongeBob grows jealous enough to break down, begging to be babied again. In the end, Grandma SpongeBob tells her grandson that he can act like an adult, but still be treated like a baby if he wants. The most childish thing you can possibly do is to want to be an adult, as by definition, an adult can't really want what they've already done. The opposite's true as well. The most adult thing you can do is to want to act more childish, as children don't have to act like children because they don't have to act. SpongeBob never wanted to stop being babied by his grandma, he just wanted other people to stop teasing him for it. His attempts to act more adult went against his true nature as they were entirely performative. Of course, when you repress a part of who you are so strongly, you're not actually eliminating the desire. Personalities are a bit like springs. The harder you push down on them, the stronger they push back. SpongeBob went from having a normal afternoon with his grandma to demanding to be put in diapers and then put to bed. From a functional, if not childish, working adult into a man-child. All because he tried too hard not to be, so he relapsed. Squidville. SpongeBob and Patrick are playing with reef blowers, destroying Squidward's house in the process. He considers this the final straw and moves to Tentacle Acres, a neighborhood of identical Easter Island heads where everyone is a squid. He spends several weeks living the same day over and over, enjoying the cycling, canned bread, interpretive dance, and clarinet quartets. But this is not a very fulfilling life, and soon Squidward is eyeing the reef blower to have some real fun. Meanwhile, SpongeBob and Patrick approach Tentacle Acres with the intent of finding Squidward and apologizing, something they struggle to do because they can't tell any of the squids apart. They see an angry mob of squids and begin asking which of them is the real Squidward, eventually concluding that the one flying around with a reef blower can't be the real one. This is an extended version of the plot from the first season's Reef Blower, that episode being an abbreviated version of the first act of this one. It's likely for the best that it was cut for the first season though, as it would make far less sense to have Squidward threaten the last straw if it was only episode 2 of the show. Having a season and change of SpongeBob bothering his neighbor makes Squidward's crash out more believable. It also provides greater contrast for the life behind the walls of Tentacle Acres, where Squidward finally gets the exact life he was craving, only to realize that without his neighbors it's kind of empty. Or rather, it's empty with himself as a neighbor. The rest of the squids in the neighborhood look and act exactly like Squidward does, down to the way they view his antics at the end of the episode. Squidward gets more fulfillment out of life with SpongeBob and Patrick next door, and he learns that being next door to a Squidward, or 2 or 300, is actually a pretty boring experience. So boring, you might just play with a reef blower to feel something. Pre-hibernation week. SpongeBob volunteers to help Sandy out with doing all the things she might not get the chance to do before her hibernation begins, and the two of them proceed to travel around the most dangerous parts of Bikini Bottom, seeking thrills. SpongeBob is exhausted by all of this, but as Sandy is preparing to sleep for the winter, she doesn't want to rest yet. So SpongeBob hides from her under Patrick's rock, prompting Sandy to suspect something is wrong as she rallies Bikini Bottom into a search of every dangerous place. Eventually, Sandy's search drives the rest of the town into anger as they also hide under Patrick's rock, finding SpongeBob, then kicking him out. SpongeBob decides to stand up for himself, only for Sandy to have fallen asleep before he can. SpongeBob volunteers to do a favor for Sandy, and because he has given her his word, he believes that it would be wrong to tell her to tone it down and go against what he volunteered for. After all, what is a good friend if not a reliable one? But being too reliable can be just as much of a mistake as it just means you're a pushover. So SpongeBob has to strike a balance between being a good friend and a good person, and doing what's right for himself, even if what he wants to do is be helpful. His solution is to avoid the situation entirely by running away, hiding from Sandy, and hoping she'll tire herself out. She does do this in the end, but not before it becomes everybody else's problem. Unlike SpongeBob, the rest of Bikini Bottom didn't know what they were signing up for. For what is an otherwise relatable story about not wanting to let down a friend, the rest of this episode ramps up the absurdity in every other way. It's not just agreeing to something and then changing your mind, it's agreeing to go sandboarding so fast you can find a grown man dressed as a child, then calling it quits around the time Sandy plays Hay in the Needle Stack. And then when G turns the search into a search for SpongeBob, manages to look so hard, she finds the same gag. A life of crime. Mr. Krabs justifies all of his recent thefts as borrowing things without asking, and SpongeBob and Patrick immediately apply this lesson to a balloon they can't afford. But after they take it, it pops, and since they can't bring it back, they've stolen it. Not wanting to get in trouble, SpongeBob and Patrick decide to live life on the lam, fleeing into the wilderness as they lament all of the nice things they'll never see again. The partners in crime then get into an argument over distribution of their chocolate bars, and they threaten to turn each other in. But once they arrive at the police station, they both confess, leading to a lengthy stay in jail that lasts about 2 seconds. As it turns out, it was National Free Balloon Day, so they didn't actually break a law. SpongeBob and Patrick are convinced to do crimes by Mr. Krabs as he tries to downplay the severity of everything he's done. Once they steal, they realize that they don't have the same finesse as Krabs, and they worry they've become hardened criminals. And the fact that they went from stealing a balloon to acting like they've done far worse is where the humor comes from. It's their first experience with breaking laws intentionally in this way, so they don't really know where to draw the line between tax evasion, Grand Theft Auto, or theft of a balloon. So where they lack experience, they fill in the gaps with general knowledge, mostly from pop culture and how others speak of criminals. Mr. Krabs starts the episode talking about what he thinks of thieves, so SpongeBob and Patrick start from there. They wander into the wilderness because that's what the outlaws in old westerns do. They turn on each other because guys without morals lack the, morals to stay loyal. And they end up weaponizing snitching because that's how all the stories end, with the bad guys behind bars and the Hays Code upheld. Survival of the Idiots. SpongeBob and Patrick cannot play at Sandy's house because she is hibernating, though Patrick ignores the warning to enjoy the snowy Treedome anyway. But the sound of the two playing wakes up Sandy, who's angry and monstrous without her beauty sleep. They give her belly-lint earmuffs to continue playing Pinhead Larry and Dirty Dan, but their roughhousing wakes her up again, and she mauls them. Now wanting to leave, SpongeBob and Patrick discover the door's frozen, and they're stuck until spring comes. They then steal some of Sandy's fur, going overboard and making fur coats for themselves, just as spring shows up. When a well-rested but bald Sandy emerges from her house, she sees the two of them with her fur and decides to use them for warmth. The concept of a bottle episode is that an episode of a show will take place entirely in one location, with the characters typically trapped in some way as they have to react and respond to exclusively the scenario, taking focus away from everything but the dynamics between the two, because it's usually just two characters. Bottle episodes were originally done as a cost-saving measure, to avoid paying more than a few actors and to save time by never changing the set. Because there is a small cast and a small number of sets used, these focus entirely on the aforementioned writing, so this is how the episodes shine. Obviously, in an animated show, there is far less of a budgetary reason to have a bottle episode, so these are largely done out of an appreciation for callbacks to other similar works. But the writing still does shine, as though it has to from the constraints. SpongeBob and Patrick play off of each other lightly arguing over who gets to be Dirty Dan while Sandy is sort of a non-character through the episode. It's only when they remember that she is still in the Treedome with them after she wakes up that the bottle episode's rules are broken, and the episode ends on a note as though the full story has finally been told. Dumped. Gary suddenly becomes infatuated with Patrick, which SpongeBob enjoys for a while as the two have a sleepover. But when Gary refuses to leave Patrick's company, SpongeBob starts getting increasingly desperate. SpongeBob attempts to get a new pet to make Gary jealous, but these new pets are nothing like Gary. When Gary and Patrick go to the pineapple to do laundry, SpongeBob breaks down in tears as Gary follows Patrick's pants into the hamper because he was just after a cookie in his pocket. Then Patrick breaks down that he's been dumped. Gary has always been a sort of non-character, more set dressing than anything else, as though he were part of the background in SpongeBob's house. The closest we get to Gary being a regular in the cast is if SpongeBob needs something to play off of during a scene where he's alone. But for all of the lack of personality the audience gets to see, SpongeBob has a different view of his pet snail, to the point that Gary is a valuable member of the Sponge family. This episode establishes that there are plenty of different pet archetypes under the sea, many of which line up with our real-world pets instead of just being a general illusion. Snails are cats, they don't just meow like cats. Worms are dogs, and some snails are more haughty than others. In fact, they tend to reflect their owners just as much as our pets do. This is why SpongeBob is quick to forgive Gary when he returns after it's revealed the snail was just acting on a sweet tooth. SpongeBob would do silly things for a Krabby Patty, so why not let Gary get away with prioritizing SpongeBob's friends as much as SpongeBob himself does? No free rides. SpongeBob fails the final boating test of the year, meaning he'll have to take another year of classes with Mrs. Puff. So to prevent being stuck with him for another year, Mrs. Puff gives him a phony extra credit assignment to claim he passed. But that evening, the SquarePants family thanks Mrs. Puff for her teaching and announces they bought their son a car, meaning SpongeBob will soon be menacing the roads. Mrs. Puff attempts to steal the car before SpongeBob can drive it, but because SpongeBob fell asleep inside of it, he begins to fight her upon waking up. The vehicle crashes, and Mrs. Puff is arrested, sentenced to give a year's worth of boating lessons. Once again, Mrs. Puff's attempts to reduce the workload of dealing with SpongeBob results in potential destruction of the town, a similar plot to what we saw back in Hall Monitor. The difference this time is that Mrs. Puff seems to have learned from her earlier mistake of letting SpongeBob loose on Bikini Bottom with the authority to pilot something he shouldn't. So she's more proactive this time, stealing SpongeBob's new car before he can turn into a second maniac, only to get caught partways through as she underestimated just how excited he would be to start driving. But it's not just Mrs. Puff attempting to get ahead of SpongeBob that causes this episode to differ from the earlier plot, but the desire of the showrunners not to be derivative. Creating yet another episode about SpongeBob terrorizing the town, only to catch Mrs. Puff off guard, would make the show's repetitiveness turn into a negative trait. So this plot iterates on the other, not just for an in-universe character reason, but because the writers of a show have to iterate or else they'll get into a rut and the show becomes boring. I'm your biggest fanatic. SpongeBob and Patrick are at the Jellyfishing convention when they see the Jelly Spotters Club and its leader, Kevin the Sea Cucumber. SpongeBob follows Kevin around in awe as Kevin realizes that he can exploit the guy's hero worship by harassing him. So SpongeBob and the Jelly Spotters go to Jellyfish Field for a test to see if SpongeBob's worthy to join them. This involves a series of increasingly bizarre challenges, all of which result in Kevin getting stung. Finally, Kevin tries to trick SpongeBob into attracting a queen jellyfish, strapped to a brace and calling "loser" until they begin chasing him with a fake queen to finish the prank, telling SpongeBob they never meant to let him join. Then the fake queen attracts a real king jellyfish who chases them into a cave, with Kevin terrified as he admits that he doesn't know anything about jellyfishing. SpongeBob then saves them with a pie-shaped bubble, and Kevin's followers crown SpongeBob as their new leader, but he turns down the offer as he believes the club is not really about jellyfish anymore. This episode is about hero worship, specifically worship, not idolization. Because it's one thing to look up to somebody and then to try to be as much like them as possible, it's another to blindly follow in their footsteps while obeying orders. After all, people, even popular ones, can say things that are different from what they do. SpongeBob was from the beginning a far better jellyfisher than Kevin ever was, but he was too obsessed with the guy to realize he was incompetent to the point of thinking that catching a single jellyfish was a difficult task. SpongeBob is talented enough to have been able to call him out on that, but he didn't think to because that would first require him to think critically about his heroes, and worship is antithetical to critical thinking. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 3. SpongeBob and Patrick are watching the Mermalayer while Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy are on vacation, freeing the trapped villain Man Ray because he claims he's now a good guy. When this turns out to be a lie, they disable him with a tickle belt, so he claims to want goodness lessons so he can go free. Patrick repeatedly messes these lessons up, eventually getting angry when Man Ray retaliates, to the point that he and SpongeBob break the remote control for the belt, though they do free Man Ray after he politely asks to have it removed. Man Ray then goes on a crime spree across Bikini Bottom, stopped by the fact that he's now been conditioned by the belt to feel ticklish if he tries to do something evil, announcing his retirement from villainy permanently. An expansion for the world established by the earlier Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, showing off some of the villains gallery as they're closer to the original heroes. Sure, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy are old now, but they weren't always that way. That's how linear time works. Man Ray was frozen in tartar sauce for years, meaning he's been preserved as a youthful villain on par with how the original heroes were. This is revealed to at once be capable of proper menace, something viewed with the vast array of weaponry the heroes have in storage, but also the way that Man Ray uses trickery to get his way before setting out to commit crimes. I mean, sure, the duo he was outsmarting were Patrick and SpongeBob, so it isn't that impressive, but the idea was still there even if the execution isn't all that tough. If the original episode introducing Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy was meant to introduce not just the characters, but the generational gap between the original heroes and the fans of the heroes, then this episode reinforces the gap between the two by examining not just the new dynamics, but what used to be there. Squirrel jokes. SpongeBob's comedy routine at the Krusty Krab flops, and desperate for something funny to win back the audience, he starts making fun of squirrels, like Sandy. This works and his career is saved, and when Sandy asks him to ease up on the insult comedy, he tells her it's just a joke and she needs not to take it personally. But other fish start treating Sandy like an idiot, so she asks again, only for SpongeBob to double down on squirrel jokes. So Sandy begins to play into the stereotype, inviting SpongeBob over and pretending she's forgotten to give him water, then attempting to drown him after he asks for some. Realizing that his jokes are hurting people, SpongeBob goes out for another insult comic routine, but this time instead of just making squirrel jokes he makes fun of everyone, keeping his career and his friends. SpongeBob originally starts making fun of those close to him out of a floundering comic career. He wasn't funny, so he resorted to humor involving punching down to others. Punching down is a term referring to when it is or is not acceptable to make jokes about a specific demographic. Basically, if the group is considered socially beneath the comic or the audience, it's frowned upon. To quote Krusty the Clown, "The pie gag's only funny when the sap's got dignity." It's funny if you make fun of people on equal social footing than you, or to punch up at those in powers, but punching down just comes across as bullying. So this connects to how a few squirrel jokes are fine, whereas making his entire routine based on them was not. Sandy is just another undersea dweller like anybody else until SpongeBob began making fun of her. Then people started to internalize the jokes. Even though SpongeBob insisted that he wasn't being serious, he has no way of controlling how his audience interprets his humor. SpongeBob treated Sandy the same way he always did offstage, but the other fish of Bikini Bottom did not. SpongeBob only chose his career in comedy over his friends when he didn't realize the cultural impact his comedy had. Then he started making fun of everybody, and things worked out because nobody was disproportionately harmed. Pressure. While cloud watching, SpongeBob and Sandy begin arguing over who would win in various races. They test out these theories but can't seem to have a fair contest, winding up at the Krusty Krab, where Patrick, Mr. Krabs, and Squidward join in on the arguments as the topic shifts from SpongeBob versus Sandy to sea creatures versus land creatures. After embarrassing Sandy when she tries to stay underwater without her helmet, she challenges them to spend a minute on the surface. The sea creatures are hesitant at first, but once SpongeBob starts to enjoy himself, the rest of the crew joins him, where they meet a few seagulls. Sandy surfaces in time to see the seagulls trying to eat the fish, and uses her karate to save the day, with everyone apologizing for riling each other up too much. There's a line between friendly competition and open hostility that's easy to cross, mostly because it can vary wildly from group to group. What is okay to say to a friend might not be okay to say to a stranger unless you are matched against them in a competition, in which case it still matters if their skill level is close to yours and if you still respect them as a competitor afterwards. Athletes and anyone in a competitive field will often hype themselves up as they understand the value of a strong mental game when it comes to staying ahead. SpongeBob and Sandy keep challenging each other, trash-talking because that's part of the game they're playing. But the rest of the fish they meet don't get that careful balance, nor do they understand the friendly rivalry, least of all the friendly part. So they start taking the big talk too seriously. Once the line between hyping yourself up and putting someone else down is crossed, people start to take the exaggerations seriously, and they escalate what they're saying to stay one step ahead. So a race to the top of a cliff can go from a friendly chase to being attacked by seagulls, all because nobody ever stopped to wonder if their opponents were just talking big for their own sake or for yours. The Smoking Peanut. It's free day at the zoo, something Mr. Krabs is taking full advantage of, while SpongeBob and Patrick are excited to see Clamu, the giant performing clam. Since Clamu is sleeping instead of doing tricks, SpongeBob throws a peanut at her to wake her up, and then she goes on a rampage. All of Bikini Bottom starts wondering who could have woken up this clam, while they search for clues related to the peanut SpongeBob threw. SpongeBob attempts to find somebody he can confide in, but everybody he knows is outraged about the incident, especially Patrick, who's leading his own investigation, only for the police to wind up arresting him. SpongeBob feels guilty over Patrick taking the fall for his crime, and he confesses, only for the zoo employees to discover the actual culprit was Mr. Krabs, who stole the clam's eggs. Clams don't use eggs, but whatever. Hoping to see a captive animal performing tricks, SpongeBob tosses food at it, only to regret his actions when it reacts more predictably. Of course, SpongeBob is not the reason Clamu went mad with emotions, that was Mr. Krabs, but SpongeBob doesn't know that. All he saw was his action, then assumed that the reaction was for him. So SpongeBob goes from assuming he's going to see a clam doing tricks to seeing a clam cry in agony, and then he recontextualizes his peanut throwing given the reaction. It is kinda messed up to throw food at a captive animal because you want to be entertained. Not a massive incident that he deserves to be locked up for, but the guilt never makes that distinction. Who also doesn't make the distinction are the other residents of Bikini Bottom, who judge the person who woke up Clamu not by the harm they inflicted, but the harm they perceived. This is based on the loudness of her cries, which sound disproportionate to a single peanut being thrown, but because nobody knows the details of this, and all they hear is the crying, they assume how hurt she is based off that. In the end, SpongeBob felt the guilt of having stolen Clamu's baby, as that was the reaction to his action, ignoring all the missing details. Shanghai. An anchor lands in SpongeBob's house, and as he is reporting this to his neighbors, it hits Squidward's too. So the three of them climb to the top, where they find it belongs to the Flying Dutchman, and for trespassing on his ship, he forces them to become his ghostly crew. Except for Squidward, who gets tossed into the Fly of Despair for complaining about the ship being dirty. The new ghostly crew sets out to begin terrorizing Bikini Bottom, but due to SpongeBob and Patrick being bad at scaring, the Flying Dutchman fails to accomplish much. So the Dutchman decides to let them go, by which he means he's going to eat them. SpongeBob and Patrick attempt to escape their fate through the perfume department, stealing the Flying Dutchman's dining sock so he can't eat them, and bargaining for its return. He agrees to grant them 3 wishes, and after wasting the first 2, SpongeBob gets the last wish to turn the Flying Dutchman into a vegetarian. They appear in front of a pineapple, in the form of fruits as he prepares to eat them anyway. This episode was originally You Wish, with the gimmick that audiences could choose one of 3 endings based on who between SpongeBob, Patrick, or Squidward would get the final wish to end out the episode. These days, the episode's reruns consist of awkward green screen removals of references to the fact that viewers were encouraged to call in, leaving the episode's true ending in the remaining runtime, as well as the follow-up episode Gary Takes a Bath to fill the remaining sections of 22 minutes. So there are only a few scant artifacts of that initial premise. Most notably among these are the Patchy the Pirate sections, a role that Tom Kenny would reprise multiple times, as it turns out the guy's just as likable in live action as he is in the recording booth. Aside from him, this episode also has liberal use of live action pieces for humor and horror. Squidward's journey down the Fly of Despair would not have been nearly as impactful if the horrors were all hand-drawn, and the perfume department gag only works because it's a real place. For those wondering, the 2 alternate endings were lost until about 2024, now available in archives, albeit at low quality. Squidward's wish was that he had never met SpongeBob or Patrick before, granted by having them introduce themselves on the ship and then getting eaten. Patrick's wish, after greatly straining himself thinking, was to have some gum so he wouldn't have to be stuck on the ship with stinky breath. Gary takes a bath. Gary refuses to take a bath, so SpongeBob attempts a series of cartoonish hijinks to get him in the tub. These culminate in SpongeBob absorbing the water and attempting to spray Gary, chased into a tree before SpongeBob falls in the mud, having to take the bath himself. SpongeBob works best when episode premises are simple, even when they are simple by necessity, like this short episode fitting the limited runtime of the second half of Shanghai. Establish a concept, then show a series of disconnected bits about that concept where the ending is repetitive enough to be obvious, then show how the end result occurs. Welcome to the Chum Bucket. Mr. Krabs loses SpongeBob's contract in a card game against Plankton, and the two tearfully say their goodbyes. But after observing the show tunes, Plankton begins to grow concerned that his new fry cook is crying instead of making Krabby Patties. So he attempts to give SpongeBob whatever he wants, from an exact replica of the Krusty Krab's kitchen to other ways of spoiling the guy. But SpongeBob refuses to cook anyway, so Plankton takes out his brain and puts it into a robot, who also refuses to cook for Plankton. In the end, Plankton begs Mr. Krabs to trade back as he can't deal with SpongeBob's annoying tendencies, and everything goes back to normal. Since Plankton can't steal the Krabby Patty formula, he steals SpongeBob instead, hoping it's the fry cook who makes the restaurant popular, and not anything Mr. Krabs did. As usual, Plankton's failures to run a restaurant have nothing to do with the material difference between the Chum Bucket and Krusty Krab, but from the skills of the individuals running the show. When Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob are separated, Mr. Krabs has an entire song dedicated to how much he misses his old fry cook, although not so much as making betting him unconscionable, no matter how often he beats Plankton. So from this we can see that Krabs really does care about the well-being of his employees, even if it's a bit self-serving in the end. Because it has to be a bit self-serving, Plankton attempts to mimic Mr. Krabs' care for SpongeBob in order to get the same results, caving and giving SpongeBob everything he could want, and more. This causes SpongeBob to turn lazy, like he doesn't need to do any work because why would he? He has everything he wants. What he does not have is the affection of a boss that he respects, even if that respect isn't as deserved as he thinks it is. So while SpongeBob might be a talented fry cook, he's also a fry cook who needs a careful hand to guide him, lest he grow too demotivated. Frankendoodle. An artist at sea drops his pencil into the ocean, and it's found by SpongeBob and Patrick, who quickly learn that this pencil is magical as everything it draws comes to life. After pranking Squidward a bit, SpongeBob draws Doodlebob, and Doodlebob immediately begins to terrorize Bikini Bottom after stealing the pencil. SpongeBob and Patrick are tricked by cartoonish antics for a time, before SpongeBob's finally able to erase the drawing, retiring to his room with several new accessories he made himself. But Doodlebob's arm survived and he redraws himself, attacking SpongeBob with the intent of erasing him. SpongeBob survives the encounter when he learns that the doodle can be defeated by paper, and the two return the pencil to the surface, where the artist at sea promptly breaks the lead. I like the idea that a pencil is considered magic not to the undersea creatures of Bikini Bottom, but rather the cartoon characters of SpongeBob SquarePants. Since everything the creators draw turns into something living and moving, the characters themselves get to experience this for a time, and then they get to experience what it's like for their creations not to just take on life, but a life of their own. SpongeBob isn't just big right now, but it was big almost as soon as it came out, and part of a property getting big means that it will soon get too big to control. SpongeBob and the associated characters are incredibly recognizable, and it's impossible for an individual to make decisions about every little bit of merchandise and context for set appearances. Not that it should be any creator's purpose to do so. Part of what makes SpongeBob remain in the public consciousness is the fact that there was so much transformative material about it, from products and endorsements to kids playing make-believe with their toys at home. Maybe Doodlebob's rampage is on the worst end of what could potentially happen, but it helps SpongeBob and Patrick's decision to give up the magic pencil at the end of the episode to make more sense. The Secret Box. Patrick shows off his secret box to SpongeBob, constantly talking up how great of a secret the thing inside of it is, but refusing to show SpongeBob, in spite of how many secrets SpongeBob attempts to share with him. SpongeBob attempts to take the box by force, but is repelled by Patrick, who threatens to end their friendship over it. Still not satisfied, SpongeBob makes a last attempt to break into Patrick's house and look inside the box himself, making a ton of noise and, eventually, waking him up. Patrick catches him and threatens to end their friendship again, but relents and lets SpongeBob look inside, where he sees a piece of string, realizing it wasn't a friendship-ending deal after all. For Patrick, the main appeal of having a secret is the having of the secret. It's him keeping something from SpongeBob. This is why he spends so much time trying to rub it in his friend's face that he had a secret kept from him at all. His plan to make SpongeBob jealous works, as the entire point of a secret is that you keep it from people. He wouldn't mention it if there wasn't something he gained out of its existence being known. This is why Patrick was so quick to change his mind and let SpongeBob look in the end. SpongeBob didn't actually care about the secret so much as he cared about the fact that he didn't know it. He was more interested in learning of it than learning about it. After SpongeBob walks away, Patrick reveals to the audience that the string actually opened a secret compartment containing an embarrassing snapshot of SpongeBob at the Christmas party. This recontextualizes the entire mystery in a way that changes the whole episode. Patrick was showing off the box to SpongeBob because SpongeBob was a part of the secret from the start. SpongeBob was even right to suspect something was off about the box as, again, he was part of it. And sure, it would have been easiest to pretend the whole thing never existed for everyone involved, but as Patrick states, the inner machinations of his mind are an enigma. Band Geeks. Squidward pretends to have his own marching band to try to deflect his old rival Squilliam's taunting, only to realize he now has to actually found and train a marching band. He puts flyers around Bikini Bottom, gathering a random assortment of side characters who proceed to play badly while fighting among themselves. Squidward gives up on his band in tears, so SpongeBob attempts to rally them together for a night of frantic practicing so as not to let him down. The day of the Bubble Bowl arrives, and Squidward is ready to be humiliated by his band's performance, only for SpongeBob and company to play Sweet Victory so well that Squilliam has a heart attack. Probably the most well-regarded episode of SpongeBob there is, the one that's made it to Super Bowls and such. And what's even more interesting is the fact that this episode breaks so many of the rules and conventions of the show up to this point. I've mentioned before that SpongeBob SquarePants is a show that has a strong central cast, and the best episodes keep it focused on this cast. I've also explained the best episodes tend to be more centralized, staying in the same few locations and following a single plot thread. And of course, the best episodes have some kind of moral where the characters who act maliciously are the ones who face most of the negative consequences. And then this episode follows Squidward from start to finish. It begins because he's lying to make himself look good, and in the end he gets exactly what he wanted. Squidward lies his way into a happy ending. He trains the people at Bikini Bottom to make himself look good, not because he wants to share the glory. SpongeBob himself is a minor character, having about as much of a role as, at the time, unnamed background fish. This is an episode that involves the town of Bikini Bottom as its secondary cast, that takes place almost entirely in new locations, visits the surface, and despite, or maybe because of all of that, it's one of the greatest episodes of SpongeBob SquarePants to air. Graveyard Shift. Realizing more hours means more money, Mr. Krabs converts the Krusty Krab into a 24-hour restaurant. Squidward is infuriated by how excited SpongeBob seems to be to do everything at night, so he attempts to scare his coworker with scary stories about the hash-slinging slasher. Despite Squidward admitting he made the whole thing up, the restaurant is then plagued by all the things Squidward said are associated with the bash-flinging masher, from flickering lights to creepy phone calls to the crasher himself arriving. But this turns out to be an innocent-looking guy who just wanted a job, his phone call because he was nervous, and the flickering lights were Nosferatu. This episode follows a very typical scary story plotline, one seen as a baseline that practically every horror movie builds off of. The monster is introduced as an incredulous urban myth, then unexplained things start to happen, then the monster appears either as exactly what it's explained as, or some logical explanation. The difference here is that the smash-dinging catheter is not told around a campfire or any other traditionally spooky locale, but in a restaurant during the third shift. The logical ending is the silliest-looking guy acting coincidentally, and the overall light tone means that, despite the UR example of Nosferatu appearing in public domain footage, it stays silly because the tone remains consistently apart from the structure. Krusty Love. Mr. Krabs sees Mrs. Puff dining at the Krusty Krab and is immediately love-struck, with SpongeBob getting the two to go on a date. Mr. Krabs spoils her the whole time, only to realize he can't afford to keep spending his money on her. So he gives SpongeBob his wallet, warning him not to let him waste any more money. But when Krabs arrives at the Puff household, he continuously pressures SpongeBob into making more and more frivolous purchases until SpongeBob snaps at Krabs' chides for being wasteful. In the end, Mrs. Puff thanks Krabs for the gifts, but says they're making her feel guilty, and she leaves him on a mostly positive note. This episode explicitly spells out the two loves of Mr. Krabs, money and Mrs. Puff, and then explores what happens when he's forced to choose between both. We know that Mr. Krabs is greedy, so to simply say that he wants to have a bunch of money is just retreading ground that's been tread before. To keep reusing character beats is to make a repetitive show, so the writers have to iterate on who Mr. Krabs is. Don't just say he loves money more than anything, but challenge that love, and have him flip back and forth to show his internal conflict. And instead of having Mr. Krabs being the one doing the actual legwork, the entire conflict is given SpongeBob as a framing device. Mr. Krabs wasted a ton of money on the first date with Mrs. Puff, but didn't have that nagging voice telling him the money was adding up. By trying to offload his shoulder angel and shoulder devil work onto someone else, we get to see it exist more externally. SpongeBob is at once the voice telling Mr. Krabs to act the way he usually does, and the one who takes the abuse when he forgets himself. All of this while Mrs. Puff is more of a bystander to the plot, but rather than this feeling like they forgot about her, it's an actual part of the narrative. The writers didn't forget to give Miss Puff any input, Mr. Krabs did, which is why the relationship was doomed to fail, regardless of how much or how little money he spent. Procrastination. Mrs. Puff assigns an 800-word essay to her student due tomorrow, and SpongeBob sets out to finish it, thoroughly distracted by the nice weather outside, doing stretches, scooching around in his chair, feeding Gary, washing his entire kitchen, calling Patrick, interrogating the mailman, and eventually dreaming that he's burned down his house. He winds up with the word "the" written and nothing else before realizing that his topic of what not to do at a stoplight can be written using his personal experiences with procrastination. He brings his completed essay to Mrs. Puff, who tells him that the assignment was cancelled for a field trip. As of right now, looking down at the word count of this video's script, I'm at word 24,451, and this is day 15 of working on it. This sounds like an intimidating number, but it only means I've written about 1,600 words a day. This is still twice as much as what SpongeBob had to write in a day, though. So the way to do it is, like all large tasks, to split it up into smaller ones and then to tackle them in smaller doses. And the way this is done is by budgeting time. An example of this is the fact that halfway through this paragraph, I stopped to top off my mug of tea, washed some dirty dishes, and then I yelled at a squirrel for eating out of the bird feeder. All of these tasks I think are essential for any large-scale writing project. Because when you sit down to write knowing you're about to spend several hours at it, any potential distraction that might occur over the next several hours will enter your mind. If your tea's not full, and your stomach's a little empty, and you haven't used the bathroom in a while, all of these problems will eventually stop you from writing. So you'll spend the entire session with your attention split, not getting anything done, while feeling progressively worse about the time you wasted. My technique is to split my writing up, spending 1 hour writing and then half an hour doing whatever. I never feel the need to get up immediately and go fix something that needs it, because I can do that in about 59 minutes. And when I'm not writing, I'm thinking about writing, using my stress to ensure that once I sit down again, I feel relieved. SpongeBob ends up writing his essay based on his experiences with not writing his essay, because it's impossible to write anything compelling about a person whose experiences consist of sitting there and writing. I'm with stupid. Patrick is freaking out over his parents coming over as he's self-conscious that they believe he is stupid. So SpongeBob offers to pretend to be a bigger idiot to make Patrick look smart, donning his karate gear and making crazy noises. But Patrick starts making fun of SpongeBob a bit too much, and when SpongeBob asks his friend to stop being so mean, Patrick doubles down and insists that his friend is the real idiot. SpongeBob tries to prove that he's really smart, but Patrick's parents just think that Patrick tutored him, making SpongeBob run away in anger. Then Squidward brings Patrick's real parents over, as the couple who was pretending to be his parents remember they don't have a son. In the first season, Patrick was a well-intentioned idiot, as he was unaware of how little he knew about the world. In the second, he became flanderized into a character who is just dumb without any additional depth. And by now, he's not only stupid, but self-aware enough to know that limitation. Patrick has become self-conscious about a trait he did not originally have at the start of the show. His solution is not to make himself look better, but to make SpongeBob look worse. Not to be good at something, but to be better than someone else in order to make his parents think more of him because their standards have become lower. Of course, it didn't matter because it wasn't actually Patrick's mom and dad he was talking to, but two complete strangers. The more he doubled down on trying to impress them, the more foolish he made himself look. It's only the end when he meets his real parents, who are just as dumb as he is, where he doesn't have to pretend anymore, as they're not going to judge him based on inherited intellect. Sailor Mouth. While taking out the trash, SpongeBob finds some graffiti and has Patrick read the word aloud, assuming it to be a sentence enhancer. Mr. Krabs informs them it's actually a bad word and forbids them from saying it or any of the other 13 curse words. They head home for some wholesome board games, only for SpongeBob to say number 11 in anger, with Patrick threatening to tell on him, accidentally saying it himself. They tell Mr. Krabs, who punishes them by having them paint the Krusty Krab, but he stubs his toe and says all 13 words in pain. So they tell his mother, and she orders them to paint her house as punishment, faking them out when she also stubs her toe, but it was just the neighbor's car horn. SpongeBob has had episodes that go adjacent to adult topics before, from karate choppers to Hooky. But this time around, the show is far more overt with what it is they're discussing, as SpongeBob and Patrick outright say the dolphined-out words, as Mr. Krabs explains exactly what's wrong with them. The episode even makes direct reference to George Carlin's 7 words bit to ensure that the adults watching at home don't detect any ambiguity. Of course, words only have meaning insofar as they're assigned meaning by those who hear them. The first few times SpongeBob swears, he does so innocently, as he doesn't realize people will take offense. This is why he more or less gets away with it, with no more than a verbal warning. But it's after saying the words intentionally later that he actually gets in trouble, and why Mr. Krabs gets in trouble, and why his own mother punishes all of them. Sure, words only have meaning as far as we assign meaning to them, but we means everybody. You might not mean offense, but others will, and it's foolish to assume other people will automatically know that you said it on accident, or that you didn't know what you were doing. Artist Unknown. Squidward is teaching an art class at the Adult Learning Annex, but his only student is SpongeBob. He attempts to start the lesson by tearing SpongeBob down to build him back up, only to learn SpongeBob's already a master multimedia artist. But Squidward's insistence on improving SpongeBob's art makes the student give up because he thinks he'll never be good enough. Then an art dealer enters the room and makes fun of all of Squidward's work before seeing SpongeBob's statue, offering to buy it to make Squidward famous. As Squidward accidentally beheads the statue, he asks for another day to make a new one, finding SpongeBob in the dump and trying to reinvigorate his inner artist. But SpongeBob has learned too much from Squidward and can no longer do anything that's not by the book, failing to produce another masterpiece as Squidward trashes the art room in rage. He storms out, only to reveal that he's made his own masterwork in anger. Most of the time an artist or art critic tries to give an objective rating to the quality of a work of art, what they're really doing is offering their opinion, then speaking like it's fact. As if to say that the things they like are objectively good, and the things that they don't are objectively bad. Or in other words, they are self-conscious about stating an opinion someone might disagree with, so instead of trying to consider other alternative, they say it's a fact, then shut out dissent. Squidward is one such art critic, assuming anything he can't personally do is bad, because if it was good, he would know how to do it. The gaps in his knowledge aren't really gaps if you pretend there's nothing there to learn. But the effect that this sort of self-centered teaching has can be viewed through its effect on SpongeBob. When people shut out every other idea, they shut out the people who have them, and thus, the artistic world never gets the chance to grow as it is stifled by the lack of creativity of those at the top. This is why high art always tends to be a little bit incomprehensible, because knee-jerk reactions about lack of merit only serve to shut out change and thus shuts out growth as well. Jellyfish Hunter. When Mr. Krabs sees SpongeBob sharing jellyfish jelly with the customers of the Krusty Krab, he orders his fry cook to start catching jellyfish to bring into the restaurant so they can expand the menu. SpongeBob proceeds to capture every single jellyfish but one, a distinct blue jellyfish who's always eluded him. This jellyfish follows SpongeBob home and traps him with his own jelly, taking SpongeBob to a factory that's recently popped up in Jellyfish Fields to show him what's happening to all the jellyfish he caught. SpongeBob confronts Mr. Krabs for exploiting the wildlife in a factory farm and frees the jellyfish. Well, Mr. Krabs does on accident. As a thanks for helping to free his brethren, the blue jellyfish lets SpongeBob catch him. SpongeBob uses his jellyfishing powers for evil during this episode, not that he was aware of what he was doing, as Mr. Krabs did, and what SpongeBob did were very similar. Mr. Krabs is even able to guilt SpongeBob into continuing to exploit the local wildlife by claiming SpongeBob is the one forgetting his roots as a fry cook. After all, Mr. Krabs is just trying to meet the demand of the market. The only thing that changed was the scale of the operation, from a single jellyfish making a single burger to 4 million making a restaurant chain. So what was the big difference in scale that caused the problem to arise? The fact is that on a small scale one can stay close enough to the production to keep that human element attached. SpongeBob personally milks each jellyfish he catches and can be careful enough to never harm the animals, whereas a factory farm, such as Mr. Krabs's, performs cruelty by its design. The economy of scale required for the entire chain only works when you eliminate unnecessary things along the supply chain. Unnecessary things like dignity, safety, and ecology. This episode is very similar to Neptune's Spatula in this regard, where SpongeBob wins a competition by caring about the food he makes, while Mr. Krabs only cares about the money it is exchanged for. The Fry Cook Games. SpongeBob is representing the Krusty Krab in the Fry Cook Games to continue the athletic rivalry against the Chum Bucket. After Patrick casts doubt on how hard fry cooking can be, he and SpongeBob begin to argue, which results in Patrick joining the Chum Bucket as its cook so he can compete against SpongeBob. Their argument escalates throughout the competition as they keep fighting back and forth, culminating in bun wrestling as the final event. They begin to fight, attacking each other not on behalf of their respective restaurants, but personally, until their pants rip off, revealing pink and yellow underwear, a sign that they still do respect each other. Patrick and SpongeBob leave the stadium as friends, ignoring their feuding bosses. SpongeBob spends this whole episode trying his best not to represent the Krusty Krab, but to show up Patrick at the behest of his boss. Patrick, too, is motivated by anger, as SpongeBob implies he isn't good enough to be a fry cook or to compete in the games. All of this, of course, is egged on by Plankton. So while the initial argument was started by the athletes, the reason it got so heated was because the guys in charge urged the participants to hate each other, all for their personal glory and the extra customers victory might bring. SpongeBob and Patrick are best friends. That's basically one of the longest existing core aspects of the show, and so to see them literally fighting one another in anger shows how much a relationship can be strained by bad actors hoping you'll hate one another more than you love yourself and those close to you. That said, their friendship does win in the end when they realize that they never stopped caring. The years of friendship between the two mattered far more than making their boss a little richer. Squid on strike. Mr. Krabs decides to tighten up his ship by taking money out of his employees' paychecks for things like breathing. So Squidward encourages SpongeBob to begin a strike with him for better working conditions. SpongeBob is horrified that this means losing his job, but Squidward's able to encourage him he'll get it back plus more if they stick to it. The strike doesn't go well, mostly just bringing in scabs and extra business, but SpongeBob is so encouraged by Squidward's leadership that the following night he plans on dismantling the establishment. Literally. Meanwhile, Mr. Krabs goes to Squidward's house to beg him to return around the same time Squidward was about to crack from the extra time with SpongeBob, negotiating to get their jobs back plus more, only to see SpongeBob's property damage and forced to pay back Mr. Krabs with an eternity of labor. The greedier Mr. Krabs is, the more pushback he'll eventually receive from guys like Squidward who only value their work insofar as it provides him with money he uses to live his real life. Basic exchanges of goods and services dictate that an employee not being paid properly will just leave, and economies of scale dictate that if enough people agree to leave, then the job's not paying enough to be worth its labor. Of course, if Mr. Krabs were paying enough, he could easily replace SpongeBob and Squidward with someone getting the same treatment, and the business would be fine. But the teenagers he hires as scabs don't work nearly as efficiently or quietly as his old employees, proving they really were valuable in a way that wasn't being measured financially. The key to understanding labor relationships is that just as the Krusty Krab sells Krabby Patties, Squidward is selling his time and effort to Mr. Krabs. It's just a matter of trying to find a good deal on all of these things. All of this goes over SpongeBob's head though, as he just listens to people yelling really loud, then gets caught up in the fervor. He takes the metaphors literally because he doesn't really know why they left in the first place. After all, SpongeBob never had an issue with the lack of payment, as he was working as a fry cook for fulfillment reasons. Sandy, SpongeBob, and the Worm. SpongeBob's house, as well as a lot of Bikini Bottom, has been eaten by an Alaskan bullworm. This big, hairy, pink monstrosity has the whole town gathered as they wonder what to do, until Sandy volunteers to take out the worm herself. SpongeBob attempts to stop her, trying to let her know that the worm is too big to handle, but Sandy assures him everything will be fine as she enters a cave and wrestles the worm into submission. And then she learns that the giant worm she fought was actually the worm's tongue, and they run for their lives. Sandy and SpongeBob are able to leap onto the worm's back with a makeshift lasso, and when it slides off of a cliff, they barely leap onto safe land in time. As they turn back to let Bikini Bottom know everything is safe, Patrick has led the rest of the town to push the building somewhere else, into the canyon the worm falls on. Sandy's whole thing is that she is from Texas, where everything is bigger. The one state bigger than Texas is Alaska, so the joke is that she can't actually handle an Alaskan bullworm. Neither Sandy nor SpongeBob can actually take out the worm, all they can do is run, but sometimes that's all it takes, as they let the worm defeat itself with the aid of gravity. Who also can't handle it are the people of Bikini Bottom, who recreate a scene from Jaws to discuss what to do about it, Dune while they're tracking the giant sandworm, and Tremors as they defeat it. Of course, the intended audience of the show likely won't get any of these references due to their age, but that's more of a strength than the limitation. The fact that you don't need to be familiar with any of the properties to understand the episode, nor to get any of the jokes. This is because the reference is the setup for the gag and not the punchline. The algae's always greener. After yet another failed attempt to steal a Krabby Patty, Plankton uses a device to swap lives with Mr. Krabs to see what it's like to be a success. He wakes up inside the Krusty Krab, finally able to get the Krabby Patties he wants, only to be interrupted by SpongeBob asking for a performance review, Pearl asking for an advance on her allowance, Squidward complaining about the promotion Plankton gave SpongeBob, and the customers complaining about Squidward's cooking. All of these distractions are put aside when Mr. Krabs enters, completely naked, so he can steal a Krabby Patty. But some good canon work by SpongeBob clothes the man, and the day is saved. Frustrated with all the chaos, Plankton returns to his own life, old wife, and holographic meatloaf. Plankton's jealousy of Mr. Krabs has always extended to the man's business ventures and nothing else. He wants the Krusty Krab and obsesses with it to the point that he only thinks of his business rival in the context of his financial success. His obsession with this trait of Krabs then informs every other part of his life. His failures back at home are attributed to nothing but his inability to run a restaurant. Plankton believes that all he has to do is get more people in the chum bucket, and then the holographic meatloaf will taste better. But Mr. Krabs is more than the Krabby Patty, as we see from the temporary life swap. He doesn't only manage the restaurant, but he does so much else with his life that Plankton never sees because he never thinks to look. What he does find after swapping, though, is a glance into his own life from the outside, a Mr. Krabs who thinks of nothing but stealing a Krabby Patty. Instead of the Krab we know, he's a nude lunatic swinging around making vague threats about streaking in the future. This insanity being the logical end result of Plankton's obsession. SpongeGuard on duty. After watching how much everybody loves Larry the Lobster lifeguard, SpongeBob wishes he could be a lifeguard too, trying to claim he is just as cool as Larry, only to be struck by a flying ice cream truck. Larry confuses some ice cream for sunscreen and offers SpongeBob a lifeguard role, with the two prancing about the beach as celebrities until it's SpongeBob's solo shift watching the beach. But SpongeBob can't swim, so he closes the beach down, tying up all the beachgoers but Patrick, who begins drowning. SpongeBob attempts to save him but ends up in the water himself, saved by Larry who, upon realizing SpongeBob faked his credentials, makes him and Patrick take swimming lessons. For a few episodes in the first season, Larry the Lobster was a rival to SpongeBob, a guy who embodied everything that SpongeBob was not. He was stronger, more popular, and he had a better job than Fry Cook. All the hallmarks of a typical bully character to start off plots by making the main character of a work jealous and bitter. But SpongeBob SquarePants is not so mean-spirited a show as to have the protagonist of the work motivated by pettiness. So very quickly the label of cool tough guy was dropped from Larry's personality, and he became a far more genuine hero, so SpongeBob looking up to and imitating the guy made more sense. He's popular because he is nice to people and he saves lives. Who wouldn't want to be like Larry? This episode then mimics the first season's Anchor Arms plot, where SpongeBob tries too hard to be like someone he's not, only to fail spectacularly when he is actually asked to fulfill the role he's pretending to. This time it's SpongeBob's reputation at stake, not so much to the other people of Bikini Bottom, but his reputation to himself, as he starts to worry that he really is a fraud. He starts out thinking he's cool enough to succeed as a lifeguard and doesn't care how many people have to be barred from swimming if he can at least maintain a level of deniability for that statement. Club SpongeBob. Squidward sees SpongeBob and Patrick in a clubhouse, telling him he won't fit in with them. To prove them wrong, Squidward tries to climb up, only to learn they meant this literally, and during his escape attempt, the clubhouse gets flung into a kelp forest. Squidward tries and fails to escape, ending up with the others who are sitting there doing nothing at the orders of a plastic magic conch shell that their club always listens to. When doing nothing gets them a jettisoned picnic set up, Squidward tries to join in and eat, only to be told by the conch that he can't. This culminates in the club being rescued by a park ranger who was asked to save them by his magic conch, and then the conch tells the four of them once again to do nothing. There are two metaplots to potentially take away from this episode, neither of which gets any real preference insofar as interpretation is supported by the narrative itself. Either your takeaway is that the inanimate magic conch shell was out to get Squidward and actively set out to strand him with the others while supporting them exclusively, or it was a piece of plastic that a series of coincidences supported the authority of. It raises a question of how often you ought to believe a broken clock if it looks like it's being right more than twice a day. There's no logical connection between what the conch says is going to happen versus what actually happens. But if a coincidence happens frequently enough, then you need to start considering that it isn't such a coincidence after all. This episode sees Squidward side against the conch, not just because SpongeBob's using it, but because there's no reason to believe in it, until it starts to accurately predict the future, at which point he gives up and allows blind faith to lead him to do nothing. My Pretty Seahorse. It's the first day of spring and SpongeBob has found a horse who he tames and names Mystery. He rides this horse to the Krusty Krab, pinning it outside where it begins to scare off customers. Mr. Krabs orders him to get rid of the horse, but SpongeBob tries to keep it a secret instead, hiding Mystery inside of the kitchen where she eats everything she can find. After these incidents, Mr. Krabs orders SpongeBob to let the horse go for her own sake, and SpongeBob tearfully agrees. Then Squidward reveals that Mystery ate the money out of the vault too. A somewhat contradictory episode to SpongeBob's usual behavior. He's always been the environmentalist to Krabs' corporatism, but here, SpongeBob is the one who takes a wild animal out of its natural habitat, while Krabs is the one who wants it to go free, at least until it eats his money. But it's not all contradiction. SpongeBob at first tries to lie about keeping the seahorse out of an interest in staying close to his pet, and he only listens to Mr. Krabs after Mr. Krabs reframes his argument. At first, he wanted Mystery out of the Krusty Krab because it was hurting his bottom line. SpongeBob only listened when he changed his tone from saving money to saving the horse, claiming she would be happier. Just one bite. Squidward announces his disgust for the food of the Krusty Krab, revealing he has never had a Krabby Patty. SpongeBob desperately tries to get him to try one, but Squidward insists he'll find it disgusting and refuses, finally agreeing to take just one bite to get SpongeBob off his back. He loves it so much he eats it out of the dirt and then wants another, but he refuses to admit this to SpongeBob, so he attempts to eat one in secret instead, failing at getting past his coworker. Eventually he has enough waiting and he sneaks into the patty vault, and in spite of the security measures, prepares to eat one. SpongeBob catches him in the act, and Squidward finally eats his fill of the Krabby Patties, but then he eats so many that they go straight to his thighs, and then he blows up. Squidward as a protagonist tends to be even crazier than SpongeBob is, to the point that almost every scene in this episode has some memeable reaction close-up made by the guy. But if every episode featuring Squidward as a protagonist wound up with him getting this unhinged, then eventually he'd just be another character like SpongeBob, just a bit more self-aware. The only reason Squidward gets away with acting like the neighbor who annoys him so much is because it isn't his default. It is the exception to how he normally acts, and thus humorous instead of normal. So a careful balance has to be struck where the characters need to act like themselves often enough that any other behavior is actually a subversion. Squidward needs to be a stick in the mud with enough frequency that episodes like this are a surprise instead of the norm. But importantly, the rest of the cast needs to act like themselves often enough to support him. If Squidward and SpongeBob swapped places, this episode wouldn't really highlight either of them. It would just be a weird subversion along the way in a rewatch of the show. The Bully. A new student transfers into Mrs. Puff's boating school, Flats, and he immediately tells SpongeBob he's going to kick his butt. SpongeBob tries to hide from Flats but gets followed around everywhere, so he attempts to get an adult to help, but Patrick is friends with him, Mrs. Puff only makes things worse, and Flats' own father's afraid of his son. SpongeBob runs away and Flats chases after him, getting into a car wreck and then saved by SpongeBob, but even this doesn't help. In the end, SpongeBob accepts his impending butt kicking, only to learn that he can't be beaten up because he's a sponge. Flats collapses from exhaustion, with Mrs. Puff confusing that for SpongeBob beating him up. Sometimes people dislike you for no reason whatsoever, or because you hit them with a net cannon back in Season 1. And this is what SpongeBob struggles with during this episode, as he attempts not only to avoid getting beaten up by Flats, but to learn why the guy hates him in the first place. Anger and bullying and the like aren't really logical things, so trying to apply logic to as strong an emotion as anger only results in wasting time. You cannot use logic to get someone out of a situation they didn't use logic to get themselves into. But what saves SpongeBob in this episode is his personality, not so much that he was able to avoid the conflict, but that his physical body reflects his emotions. SpongeBob has always been a very resilient guy, never letting setbacks in life get him down for long, and always assuming the best out of people. We even see a bit of it here as he keeps assuming that Flats is just messing around when he makes his threats. Because we know SpongeBob after 2 seasons and change, it doesn't feel like a cop-out that he wouldn't feel his butt getting kicked. After all, SpongeBob has faced injury before. But rather, it's a logical escalation of his character facing off against a schoolyard bully. Nasty Patty. Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob see a news report about a fake health inspector, and assuming it's the guy in their restaurant, they make a nasty patty to feed him for trying to scam them for free food. Then they learn the guy in their restaurant was the real health inspector and panic over his assumed death. So they take the body to a nearby hill to bury, only to be found by 2 cops just as the health inspector slides out of his shallow grave. They hide the body in the trunk, then try to move it to the freezer as Mr. Krabs distracts the officers from looking into what SpongeBob's up to. But the police are alerted to someone trying to bury a body, and when they check the freezer, SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs attempt to turn each other in, only for the freezer to be revealed as empty as the health inspector was alive all along. He gives them a passing grade in spite of the constant mauling by SpongeBob, Krabs, and the 2 officers. Nobody in this episode behaves in a logical manner at all, constantly letting their emotions dictate all of their actions. And while this is usually a complaint made about the plots of some shows, that characters all seem to be holding the idiot ball, this episode works specifically because there's no logic to it. The characters behave according to established beats of their personalities rather than logic, but it's not cold logic the audience is looking for, so these strong personalities end up being the crux of the episode. Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob are relieved that they're going to pass the test after Mr. Krabs worried a single issue would find them totally shut down. Then he grows furious the health inspector was trying to scam them, despite SpongeBob suggesting that they just talk to him and clarify. Then, the health inspector chokes on a fly and they assume it was their nasty patty that did the deed, rather than checking for bite marks or even to see if he was actually dead. They assume the police are after them, not because they didn't cover their tracks well enough, but because they were feeling guilty, emotions overriding logic. It's okay for a character to act in an illogical manner, so long as they act in a consistent illogical manner, idiotic as the narrator might call it out as being. Idiot Box. SpongeBob orders a giant TV, then throws out the TV to play inside the box alongside Patrick using their imagination. Squidward asks if he can have the TV, then makes fun of them for playing inside a box, only to be distracted by the constant noises coming from outside his house. SpongeBob tries to tell him these noises are just imaginary, but Squidward assumes that they have some sort of secret switch or tape player hidden, and they're messing with him. He tries distracting himself and later playing with his own box, but can't get his imagination to work, eventually resorting to checking the box after SpongeBob and Patrick go to bed. He doesn't find anything until he facetiously begins to play with his imagination. Then, the box begins to make noises as he celebrates, unaware that these were actually noises made by a dump truck. This episode is about Squidward's lack of imagination, and yet for that theme, it's also built on the idea that Squidward has an overactive imagination. He's the one hearing fantastic sounds while coming up with increasingly elaborate ways SpongeBob and Patrick might have been messing with him. While this episode is about SpongeBob's imagination turning the act of sitting into a box into a grand adventure to Robot Pirate Island, it's also about the fact that Squidward is doing the same thing. He's listening to his neighbors play in the front lawn while imagining everything they are. It's not that Squidward lacks imagination, it's that he lacks the ability to direct that imagination to making himself happier. He can only imagine scenarios that don't exist where everyone's out to get him, and then he gets angry at these made-up scenarios. Squidward finally gets over himself at the end of the episode, when his daydreams line up with reality, as he at last understands the fun of having an imagination, even if that imagination is helped out a bit by reality. It's the fact that he didn't check to see if that reality lined up with his fantasy that let him believe he was driving for real, as every other time Squidward used his imagination or heard others using theirs, his desire was to go confirm. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 4. SpongeBob scares off Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy when he accosted them for their autographs while trying to eat. The heroes flee, leaving Mermaid Man's belt behind in the rush, which SpongeBob finds and begins to play with. When Squidward gets tired of SpongeBob goofing around, he threatens to call Mermaid Man to let him know he dropped the belt, and SpongeBob uses the Shrink Ray to stop Squidward from using the phone. Unable to turn him back, he flees the restaurant to ask Patrick for advice. Turning it to Wumbo doesn't work, and Patrick gets drunk as well. Then SpongeBob keeps shrinking others to stop them from reporting him. Soon, all of Bikini Bottom, including Mermaid Man himself, has been shrunk, and he's too old to remember how to reverse the process, so SpongeBob shrinks the city itself so everything is basically back to normal. SpongeBob's fear in this episode comes from a single incident spiraling out of control as one little lie turns into a bigger and bigger one, with the cover-up becoming a more dangerous incident than the original crime of shrinking a bucket of pickles. He's concerned that he will be kicked out of the fan club of a duo who ran away from him when he tried to get an autograph, oscillating between obliviousness and self-consciousness after the moment where he decides to keep the belt for himself. This parallels SpongeBob's actual use of the belt, knowing it isn't right to take it and not fully understanding what to do with it, just as he doesn't fully understand his relationship to the heroes that he worships. In the end, SpongeBob manages to find another option that does not involve either better understanding the belt or confessing to his heroes by simply shrinking everything else. Like he's taking his impressions from the one-sided relationship he has with Mermaid Man and applying it to everything else in his life, just as he spent the episode assuming the people of Bikini Bottom all wanted to report him to his heroes, something they didn't actually care to do until after he zapped them with a shrink ray. Doing time. SpongeBob crashes a test vehicle into a juice truck outside the retirement home, and Mrs. Puff is arrested for his reckless driving. She's afraid of jail for a while before realizing there's no SpongeBob. Then she begins to enjoy the peace and quiet away from him. But SpongeBob feels guilty about getting his teacher arrested, so he and Patrick plan to break her out of jail by breaking in. Every time Mrs. Puff tries to warn the guards about SpongeBob being in the jail, they tell her it's just a normal occurrence and reassign her somewhere else. Soon she's in a padded room, revealed to be made of sponge, just before waking up in the crash. Realizing it was all a nightmare, and then realizing it was a flashback, and then a dream in prison, and then she gives up on trying to make sense of it. Mrs. Puff-centric episodes have thus far all built upon each other, going from accidentally unleashing SpongeBob's misplaced confidence on Bikini Bottom, to her actively trying to prevent her mistakes from last time by sabotaging him, to this episode, where Mrs. Puff actively avoids responsibility by, ironically enough, paying a societal price for her actions. She happily takes the fall for her student, making it look like she's being the socially conscious one when she's really just avoiding the actual conflict between her desire to teach and a student who is unteachable. In exchange, SpongeBob's not aware she made. Because to Mrs. Puff, freedom is not so much freedom to do as you please, but the freedom from things you don't want to engage with. Prison is liberating because there is no SpongeBob, just as much as a full life lived outside of a prison might still feel stifling because of unlikable things outside of your control. A bit like what the fish in the Workday montage goes through. Snowball Effect. An iceberg comes to Bikini Bottom, blanketing the town in snow as the citizens all come out to play, annoying Squidward as SpongeBob and Patrick's snowball fight keeps bugging him. They ask him to join, but he turns the offer down, saying that knocking each other's brains out with snowballs is childish. He does, however, want to watch SpongeBob and Patrick knock each other's brains out, only to learn they've internalized his lesson and made a peace treaty. In an attempt to undo this treaty, he joins in on the fight, then quickly learns that he enjoys snowball fighting as he becomes obsessed over it, despite SpongeBob and Patrick having gone inside hours ago. Once again, this episode involves Squidward trying to stop his neighbors from engaging in some behavior that annoys him, only to end up getting even more involved than had he just ignored them. The distinction this time is that Squidward, rather than ending the episode more miserable than at the start, ends up being far better off as he really does enjoy the nonsense his neighbors get up to. It's a combination of the other themes introduced, from Squidward not being a bad neighbor on purpose, just a neglectful one, to Squidward typically making problems worse for himself by trying to fix everything. Combining these two Squidward staple plot lines creates something new, where Squidward actually gets a happy ending when he begins to ignore his original urge to shut down the fun so he can join in instead, even though he only joined in to watch the other two bash each other's brains out. Squidward is just as capable of being stupid and silly as SpongeBob or Patrick. He merely tells himself that he is better than they are. Once he stops thinking of himself as better, he begins to actually have fun for once, instead of just pretending to. 1. Krabs' trash. Mr. Krabs is having a yard sale, selling garbage from around Bikini Bottom by claiming it's antique. After selling a soda drinking hat to SpongeBob, he learns it was actually a collector's item worth up to $1 million. So he attempts to get the hat back by trading to SpongeBob and eventually scaring it off of him with a story of the deceased Smitty Werbin Jaegerman Jensen, the hat's rightful owner. Despite the story being made up, SpongeBob manages to find this grave, and Mr. Krabs rushes to the graveyard to dig it up. He fights through legions of the undead to escape with his prize, returning to the yard sale where the collectors who offered to buy it reveal that they found a warehouse full of them and the hat is worthless. Every time Mr. Krabs tells a lie, somebody ends up believing it, and sometimes the reason they believe it is because the lie came true. This starts out small during the episode, like Mr. Krabs telling a man that an umbrella full of holes is actually a valuable antique. The lie about it belonging to royalty was caught, but the lie about it being valuable was not, and because the man paid a lot for it, Mr. Krabs was technically correct. Mr. Krabs then lies about the hat being valuable to get SpongeBob to buy it, only to learn that he was also correct. When he claims it belonged to a great man and that anyone who keeps the hat will be haunted by his spirit, SpongeBob then confirms that the man not only existed, but an army of the undead attacks Mr. Krabs for trying to take it for himself. After all of his lies come true, the episode ends on his very first one, the one about the nature of his yard sale. That one doesn't come true. The soda drink hat was originally found in the garbage, and in the end, a whole collection of them is found in the garbage. As seen on TV. After seeing how much Squidward tried to spend on a commercial for the Krusty Krab, Mr. Krabs attempts to do it as cheap as possible, resulting in the employee starring in a commercial that airs late at night. As SpongeBob was technically in the commercial, he begins to let the fame go to his head, assuming everyone around him is recognizing this fame. This results in SpongeBob quitting his job to be a full-time celebrity, attempting to give the hungry customers what they want with singing, juggling, and comedy. They are furious about this development until SpongeBob drops a patty on the grill, realizing the crowd loves it when he makes Krabby Patties, and then returning to his job just with extra steps. The one thing SpongeBob loves more than anything else is his work. Him getting this work was the premise of the pilot, and he's had breakdowns before over the thought of being fired or even out of work for a short time. So it seems baffling to see SpongeBob voluntarily quit his work at the Krusty Krab for any reason, except here it makes some sense for him to leave. The one thing SpongeBob has also valued is fame and a stage of his own, from his debut on Squidward's talent show to his attempt to throw Sandy under the bus for his stand-up. Most plots are just about a character getting some aspect of who they are exaggerated for a short time due to some circumstance, so it makes sense for SpongeBob to quit over a potential advancement, not of his career, but of his ambitions. Anyway, this episode posits that it's not the amount of fame that can go to a person's head, but the perception they have of that fame. SpongeBob isn't famous or well-liked, but he doesn't know that. So he perceives normal social interactions into one-sided parasocial ones, attributing behaviors to non-existent worship, as his interpretation of the way people treat him is no different than his misinterpretation of his own fame, because he was in a commercial. He ends up as a fry cook again, this time assuming that he is cooking food as a bit, and accidentally reinventing the concept from first principles of what it is the customers want. Can you spare a dime? Mr. Krabs cannot find his first dime and accuses Squidward of stealing it, and tired of being mistreated and suspected all the time, Squidward quits. He turns down an offer by SpongeBob to stay at his pineapple until winding up homeless, then he accepts living with his former coworker. SpongeBob waits on Squidward for months, hoping the guy will get back on his feet, until slowly coming around to accept that Squidward has no interest in getting a job. SpongeBob then snaps, demanding that Squidward work again before kicking him out and dragging his bed to the Krusty Krab, where he demands Mr. Krab accept his old employee. While literally shaking him down, SpongeBob finds Mr. Krabs' original dime in his pants, and Mr. Krabs reluctantly accepts Squidward back, though his treatment is more or less unchanged. One of the best ways to explore a character in a story is to take a major aspect of them away, and then to see what happens naturally. Squidward is considered a loser for working the same job that SpongeBob is excited to have, all because Squidward considers himself better than that job. So to get rid of the job shows what Squidward is like without that part of him, and this episode posits that, without the little bit of grounding he has at the Krusty Krab, he's a complete failure. It's the food service job that supports his arts, and not his art that keeps him sane enough to work a food service job. All of this is built upon established character, not only for Squidward but the rest of the cast as well. It's in character for Mr. Krabs to get obsessed over money to the point of harassing his employees when he panics. And it's in character for SpongeBob to try to help out his neighbor without really understanding how to help, just that he should. SpongeBob has a tendency to see the best in people, sometimes by imagining positive traits that they don't have, and so it's hard for him to see that Squidward has no intention of leaving his bed until he has a reason to do so. No weenies allowed. SpongeBob and Sandy discover a new club, the Salty Spittoon, though only Sandy is tough enough to get past the bouncer, Reg. SpongeBob attempts to prove his own toughness, but fails, ending up at Super Weenie Hut Juniors with the other weenies. But he's undeterred, and attempts to use disguises and stealth to enter, only resulting in him getting embarrassed and kicked out. But when SpongeBob realizes that he could fake a fight to get accepted, he and Patrick pretend to get into a scuffle where, due to Patrick's acting, Reg is impressed enough to finally accept SpongeBob into the building. Then he slips on an ice cube and is sent to Weenie Hut General. This episode's plot is not too different from all the other times that SpongeBob has attempted to act a certain way in order to fit in with the crowd he is not usually a part of. Whether it's bodybuilders or lifeguards, SpongeBob has lied about himself before, as he hopes, not so much to fit in with strangers, but to join his other friends with what they're doing. SpongeBob didn't randomly decide he wanted to be a tough guy, he saw Sandy get in while he did not. There was more of a fear of missing out than there was a fear of being a weenie. Because SpongeBob actually fit in well with the weenies, they were his kind of people all along. A lot of the reason that he wanted to get into the Salty Spittoon was because he was told he couldn't. It's not that he would even fit in if he succeeded, proven at the end of the episode where SpongeBob finally fakes his way into the spittoon, only to be immediately hospitalized by his own weenie tendencies. As it turns out, some people are not gatekeeping arbitrarily, but for the good of the people on the outside. The bouncer wasn't trying to protect the Salty Spittoon from SpongeBob, but SpongeBob from the Salty Spittoon. Squilliam returns. While on his lunch break, Squidward sees Squilliam bragging about how much more successful his life is than Squidward's. To cover for being a cashier, Squidward pretends that the Krusty Krab is a 5-star restaurant that he owns, and Squilliam invites himself over. Squidward attempts to train the others into a crew of professional servers, though Patrick is too much of a weenie, and Mr. Krabs' appetizer is monstrous. SpongeBob, on the other hand, nearly has a breakdown over trying to memorize everything about fine dining, but eventually succeeds when he clears his mind of everything but fine dining and breathing. The new Krusty Krab impresses Squilliam so much, he's ready to admit that Squidward does not suck eggs. And then he asks SpongeBob for his name, which was thrown out with everything else. SpongeBob freaks out as the appetizer escapes, and the whole scheme falls apart as Squidward is, once again, laughed at by his rival. A Squidward-centric episode once again involving Squilliam, whose whole character is just making Squidward's insecurities come to the forefront. He starts the episode discussing how he is going to make something of himself before wandering off aimlessly to do nothing, only really attempting to fake a turnaround after meeting with his rival. It's not that Squidward lacks ambition, he merely does not have the motivation to achieve any of his goals, and to him, that's the more embarrassing thing about his life. Squidward has already been established as the kind of guy who does not value himself based on the money he makes or the career that earns that money. He values his artistic endeavors and personal achievements more. But these are hard to show off at a moment's notice, especially when confronted by someone whose personal achievements are more easily measured by society because he owns nice things. So because Squidward lacks the self-confidence to brag about the things he enjoys about himself, he winds up trying to impress Squilliam using the same metrics that Squilliam uses, a losing battle from the start. Crab Borg. SpongeBob has nightmares about a scary movie about robots he saw and begins to jump at things around the Krusty Krab as he thinks robots are out to get him. After interrogating some customers, he begins to suspect that Mr. Krabs is a robot after Mr. Krabs makes beep boop bop noises at his radio. He tries to warn Squidward, who is doubtful of the robot invasion theory, until Mr. Krabs accidentally spills salt in his eyes while retrieving a hard-boiled egg while holding batteries in his pocket. Then Squidward is convinced. They interrogate the fake Krabs by tying him up and smashing all his electronics before they eventually get to the register. Then Krabs begins to cry over how much he loves his register, two things robots are not supposed to be able to do. Mr. Krabs is not a robot, and accusing him of such is something that would ordinarily be dismissed as quickly as Squidward does during this episode. But fear and logic can't coexist as SpongeBob shows off, and what was once an absurd premise for an accusation feels more legitimate because SpongeBob begins to search not for contradictory evidence, but for things his confirmation bias can feed off of. What makes this episode interesting is how Squidward gets caught up in SpongeBob's shenanigans while he usually observes from a distance. It's typically Patrick dragging SpongeBob down to the depths of stupidity with him, but now even SpongeBob can perform that role of a story, with Squidward serving as the straight man of the episode until the straight man role stops being funny enough for two people to hold it, Mr. Krabs being the other one. Rockabye Bivalve. SpongeBob and Patrick discover a baby clam behind a bush and they agree to take care of it because it's all on its own. For a while, things work out as they discover how to feed it and change diapers, and they agree to split up the work between SpongeBob as the mom and Patrick as the dad. This means that SpongeBob does all the work around the house while Patrick goes to his rock for what he calls work. But after denying SpongeBob a break from changing diapers and such, SpongeBob finally interrogates Patrick on this work to learn that he's just watching TV and eating junk food. As they argue, the clam is about to jump out of the second-story window, and when they fail to catch it in time, they learn this clam can now fly, and they don't have to parent it anymore. SpongeBob and Patrick play a very advanced game of house after they find a clam and take care of it, their game turning not into simple role-playing, but instead adopting the negative cultural stereotypes of the characters they play. SpongeBob and Patrick are fine at taking care of the clam when taking care of the clam is easy, but once things become difficult and the game turns into an actual chore, Patrick, playing the father, leaves all the difficult stuff to SpongeBob and calls it her responsibility as if to absolve the father of doing any actual parenting. It's fitting that when the clam flies away as an adult, it kisses SpongeBob while dropping a coconut on Patrick's head, as that is what he spent his time watching instead of watching his child grow up. The episode is self-aware enough to show how normalized it is that the mother of the household is expected to do all the child-raising work while not getting too in its head to avoid making that into a joke. Part of how it strikes this balance is through its characters. Is the episode calling men lazy and uninvolved, or is it saying that specifically about Patrick? In doing both, it allows the conversation to be framed not around being less manly by raising kids, but about being less like Patrick Star. Wet painters. On a slow business day, Mr. Krabs has SpongeBob and Patrick paint his house, but he warns them that the paint is permanent and they cannot get it on any of his many knickknacks or he will mount their butts above his fireplace. After accidentally producing a massive paint bubble, and then another, and then inflating it, the entire house is painted perfectly by the explosion, save for a small splotch of paint on Mr. Krabs' first dollar. They then proceed to make this problem worse in their attempts to fix it, smearing the paint around and maiming Patrick in the attempt to remove it. Mr. Krabs returns home as SpongeBob and Patrick try to hide the damage from him, but he discovers it and punishes the duo by licking the paint off himself because it comes off with saliva. SpongeBob assumes that Krabs lied about the paint to get them to be careful, but then admits that he just likes to mess with them before laughing so much he unpaints his whole living room. Mr. Krabs has always been established as such a stingy guy that SpongeBob and Patrick being motivated by fear of damaging his first dollar almost feels like a legitimate thing for them to be concerned with. It's established enough to the point that, when Mr. Krabs laughs that the paint was actually easy to remove, it's a joke played on the audience as well. After all, SpongeBob and Patrick just spent most of the episode's runtime in fear they might end up with their butts on Krabs' mantle, a threat that he might just make good on. The audience doesn't know how much of that was cartoonish over-exaggeration. The rest of the episode is about trapping SpongeBob and Patrick into a situation they're too careful and or incompetent to handle, then watching as they try various schemes to get out of the situation while making things worse. Less like the episodes that are an extremely simple premise, this is an episode with a series of connected comedy bits based around paint, an evolution of the usual cartoon comedy formula seen thus far, fitting for the third season of the show. Krusty Krab training video. the training video for the Krusty Krab that teaches employees everything they need to know before making a Krabby Patty. This includes Mr. Krabs' origins to the modern Krusty Krab and its fear of robot overlords. Before making a Krabby Patty, it also discusses personal hygiene, organizing your workstation, talking to your boss, handling emergency situations, and POOP, the acronym. It does not include the secret formula. The first impression a new employee might have of the Krusty Krab, but not an episode that could work as a first impression of a new member of the audience. Being able to frame these two aspects is how the episode gets its comedy, from Squidward serving as the bumbler to SpongeBob's sycophantic love of his work, to the nonchalant way it treats so many insane aspects of the show that thus far have managed to sneak their way into the realm of acceptability. Of course, there's a tiny man who tries to steal the hamburgers, and yes, we all scream when he shows up, but no, he's not a real threat. More humor is derived from revelations about the Krusty Krab and its owner that are not followed up on. Mr. Krabs is a depressed war veteran. The restaurant used to be a retirement home, now let's talk about poop. Longtime viewers can be just as baffled as the hypothetical trainee, allowing anyone watching the episode to feel charmingly disoriented by the low-budget knockoff of Eye of the Tiger, and faux-quality aesthetics in what is effectively just a series of comedic bits passing themselves off as educational, which somehow makes the absurdism even funnier, just for trying to exist. Chocolate with nuts. After reading about fancy living through Squidward's mail, SpongeBob and Patrick decide they want to become entrepreneurs by selling chocolate bars door to door so they can get rich. Their sales don't go too well, as their first customer goes crazy over the thought of chocolate, and their second and third only overcharges them for chocolate bar carrying bags, then carrying bags for the carrying bags. They come up with a few other schemes like sweet-talking customers, but find more success with outright lying about what the chocolate does. This works for a bit until they give away all their money buying chocolate bars from the fish who sold them the bags after he uses a full-body cast as a disguise. In the end, they get caught by the chocolate-obsessed fish who buys their entire stock. And with the money, they take the two old women they started lying to out to dinner. It's a standard by now for the very simple premises to be the most entertaining episodes, and this one's no exception. SpongeBob and Patrick spend the episode selling chocolate bars, with a short scene at the beginning to show how they got the idea, and a short scene at the end to explain why they didn't keep the money. Aside from that, it's a series of comedic beats, only connected by the initial plot. You could swap around some of the schemes and the establishing shots, and nothing would really change, though the episode would still lose something. Because it isn't just that they're trying random stuff, but their attempts are all informed by earlier failures. It's not just door-to-door failings, but an escalation of their ineptitude that leads them to increasingly desperate tries to sell things. Culminating in a success when they finally realize that just lying about the product works far better than their original plan of playing markets intelligently. And this doesn't come out of nowhere, but is established as a valid strategy as soon as SpongeBob and Patrick buy the first set of carrying cases. The only ones who make it in this world are the liars, the cheats, and the ones with the most dumb luck. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 5. After an argument over Mermaid Man ordering off the kids' menu for Barnacle Boy, the skinnier hero declares that he is going to join a side that will give him more respect, and he sides with Evil, joining the Dirty Bubble and Man Ray in a crime spree with their new organization, Every Villain is Lemons. As he's now outnumbered, Mermaid Man has to recruit SpongeBob, Patrick, Sandy, and Squidward as sidekicks, reforming the International Justice League of Super Acquaintances. These heroes set out to defeat Evil at Makeout Reef, though the amateur superheroes immediately defeat themselves with their powers. Now victorious, Barnacle Man makes his demands of Mermaid Man, which consist of him rejoining the good guys with a little more respect, as they're once again friends. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy are old. The issue presented in this episode is that, while one of the heroes is constantly reliving his glory days, Barnacle Boy is resentful of the sidekick treatment he's been getting for so long. After all, anyone would get sick of being called boy after several decades of not being boy-aged. Since Mermaid Man hasn't really moved on though, Barnacle Boy forces him to do so by joining Evil, making him realize that he cannot relive his hero days without his hero sidekick, and ought to be more respectful for the person who made all those good times possible. In the end, it's not like Barnacle Boy even wanted most of the things that he demanded. Later episodes still call him Barnacle Boy. He never finished his Krabby Patty. The status quo is more or less upheld because changing the status quo was never Barnacle Boy's plan. It was just to prove that he could if he wanted to. He just didn't want to change things up. It's for the best because most of this episode is about the people who would constitute this hypothetical changing of the guard in the new IJLSA. Namely, the usual main characters of SpongeBob SquarePants who bring their usual ineptitude into the plot. just with no decade of experience and goodwill to lead back on. New Student Starfish. SpongeBob invites Patrick to Mrs. Puff's boating school and gives him a tour of the learning facilities as well as Roger, the class pet. Class begins and the two begin to mess around, though Patrick's antics keep getting blamed on SpongeBob until SpongeBob is moved to the back of the room and eventually stripped of one of his good noodle stars. Furious, SpongeBob attempts to fight Patrick, for which they're both given detention. But when Roger's heat lamp goes out, they put aside their differences to save him, getting gold stars for their efforts. SpongeBob's whole arc in boating school has to do with the fact that he's incredibly bad at it, which is then put into comparison with how much effort he puts into everything else. The joke is that SpongeBob is good at everything they teach in boating school, except for boating, the one thing he's there to do. As it turns out, this failure is not unique to him, but expands to his friends as well. SpongeBob is not good at driving a boat, Patrick is no different, and their worst traits are doubled when they're together. It's a little bit frustrating to see Mrs. Puff constantly blame SpongeBob, with a reputation for being a good student, for all of the things Patrick does wrong, but it makes a bit more sense for two reasons. Firstly, the only reason SpongeBob has so many gold stars by his name is not because he's a perfect student, but because he's been in boating school for longer than anyone else. Secondly, it's easy to imagine Mrs. Puff subtly getting revenge against SpongeBob for all the car crashes he has put her through. He's technically a well-behaved student, so she can't just take out her anger on him, but she's not going to look too closely at the details if she can potentially send him to the back of the classroom to be less of a menace. Clams. Mr. Krabs celebrates his $1 millionth by taking the Krusty crew out clam fishing. SpongeBob relentlessly overcasts his line, grabbing random things including the $1 millionth Mr. Krabs brought on the ship, and before he can reel it in, a giant clam eats it. So Krabs orders the crew to catch this giant clam, refusing to take them back to dry land or let them have any food until they do. SpongeBob and Squidward try to fake that they found the dollar, and when that doesn't work, they attempt to flee, but Mr. Krabs goes mad and uses them as live bait to attract this clam. Once lured, he dives in after his dollar, fighting the clam and disappearing for a while, before returning with nothing but a head, an arm, and his $1 millionth. We've seen before that Mr. Krabs is not just obsessed with money, but with specific bits of money he's earned, be it his first dollar getting covered in paint, or his dime misplaced, or his $1 millionth eaten by a clam. In early seasons, Mr. Krabs was a greedy guy, but always trying to make as much money as possible with as little work as he could do. But here his greed takes on a slightly evolved form, almost sentimental. It's not just that he wants a lot of money, but that he thinks the money wants him back. His money's valuable based off when and how he gets it. His greed isn't mindless though, at least not at first. He begins the episode so grateful for his $1 millionth that he rewards his 2 employees with what he believes is a good prize. But by the end of the episode, he's willing to use them as live bait to get his money back, even referencing a fourth wall break to conduct an orchestra to ensure that all of that he's doing is as sinister as it sounds. So the escalation at the end of the episode, where he has traded most of his body for a dollar, is the logical endpoint to who he is now. The idea of the dollar was worth more than the dollar. The Great Snail Race. Squidward orders a new pet, a purebred snail he names Snelly, bragging to SpongeBob about his training for the Great Snail Race, while saying that a mutt like Gary could never win. So SpongeBob decides to prove him wrong by donning a stereotypical coach's outfit and ordering Gary around in intense training. After several days of this, they arrive at the race against Squidward and Snelly, as well as Patrick and his pet Rock, where Snelly gets an early lead. Gary begins to race but has multiple blowouts, eventually crashing in the middle of the race when Snelly turns around to make sure he's okay. Patrick and Rocky wind up winning, but Patrick has the trophy engraved to his friend, Squidward Tortellini. As usual, SpongeBob has no interest in a subject until he's told he cannot participate in it due to not being strong or tough or good enough for it. Several plots have already played out with this sort of beginning, but what differentiates this one is the fact that it wasn't SpongeBob who was told off, but his pet snail Gary. Gary has no interest in running a snail race, even after meeting Snelly and being directly compared to her. He was fine to sit at home and watch TV, but SpongeBob got indignant on his pet's behalf, deciding to whip a snail into shape who did not want to be in shape. So this is where the real disagreement comes from. SpongeBob wanted to defend the honor of a snail who didn't care, pushing his pet beyond the limit, as the limit was anything outside his front door. Maybe there's another world where Gary would have taken more after SpongeBob and eagerly set out to disprove Squidward, but this was not it. In the end, Patrick wins as he was the only one who actually took care of his pet, whether it was a rock or not. Even if the ending was a bit absurd, it thematically made sense for a rock to win that race. Midlife Crustacean. Mr. Krabs starts worrying that he is becoming old because he can't keep up with his daughter's slang. When he overhears SpongeBob and Patrick talking about their plans for the night, he asks to join them only to learn that their debauchery consists of visits to the laundromat, cleaning up a litter, and so on. He's about to call it a night when Patrick offers to take him on a panty raid, and Krabs excitedly joins in on the first choral activity of the night. But he soon learns that the house they're raiding belongs to his mother, and Mr. Krabs gets grounded and sent to his room. Mr. Krabs is an old man, though this wasn't really part of his character until kind of recently. Like Patrick being self-conscious about his stupidity, this episode plays up a character's new traits for its plot. But just as before, Mr. Krabs' age feels like such a natural progression of who he is, and that it isn't jarring for him to complain about being old. Part of this is Clancy Brown's performance being gruff enough that the old man part comes naturally, as that was always a bit more interpreted than the piratey voice he was originally meant to have. After all, we see a lot less piratey stuff from him than old man stuff these days. Mr. Krabs doesn't want to consider himself old because to him being old means being uncool. His attempts to be younger are also attempts to be cooler. That's why his mistake was to hang out with SpongeBob and Patrick. Sure, they're younger than he is, but they're not cool. Kids can be lame too. It takes him a while to realize that SpongeBob and Patrick aren't actually cool though, as he is dragged through several super lame activities, going along with them because he acknowledges that he lacks the ability to tell that these are lame things, not just lame to him but everyone. In the end though, Mr. Krabs does finally get his wish, one that keeps with the themes of the episode, as being grounded by your mother is a childish thing, but not a cool one. Born Again Krabs. Mr. Krabs tries to save money by serving spoiled meat, and he tries to eat that rotten patty to prove it's okay to serve, then he's hospitalized. While there, Mr. Krabs meets the Flying Dutchman, who lets him choose between eternity in Davy Jones's locker, or being less greedy. Krabs revamps the Krusty Krab into a more consumer-friendly restaurant, but the only reason he's okay with losing money this way is as he's convinced he's still dreaming in the hospital. When he learns he's awake, he begins acting greedy again, with the Flying Dutchman returning to uphold his end of the bargain. SpongeBob tries to stand up for his boss, only to be sold by Mr. Krabs for pocket change. Though in the end everything works out as SpongeBob was too annoying for the Flying Dutchman. One of the most surefire ways to interrogate a character is by looking at who they are not. Take away the core aspect of who they are, and see what happens as all the other parts of who they are get to shine. Here we get to see what Mr. Krabs is like when he loses his greediness. He's still an old man, tying into the previous episode's plot, as his fear of impending death is about half his motivation in this episode. So what does a selfless Mr. Krab actually act like? This episode doesn't really touch on this as he's convinced that the entire thing's a bad dream, and he's just going through the motions of running a business at a loss until he wakes up. When he realizes it's not a dream, he immediately reverts, revealing that not only was his idea of a nightmare a restaurant with free refills, but that he snapped back to greed even harder than before. Mr. Krabs makes a customer unwatch a movie, then he nearly tears a fish's fin off for a penny, finishing the episode by selling his best fry cook for a few cents. All of this is after he nearly ran himself out of business because he refused to throw away rotten meat, so the episode had an exaggerated negativity out of the guy from the beginning. I had an accident. SpongeBob breaks his butt in a sandboarding accident and on doctor's orders tries to avoid any danger, only to realize that butt-related danger is all around him. So he locks himself in his house, refusing to come out and talking to inanimate objects. Sandy and Patrick try to get him outside by showing off all the nice things outdoors, but SpongeBob ignores them to filter feed and work with a long spatula. So Sandy and Patrick resort to danger, having Patrick don a gorilla suit and pretend to attack Sandy. This doesn't work. Then a real-life gorilla shows up. SpongeBob leaves his house to save his friends and gets ripped in half. Then he realizes it makes no sense for a gorilla to be underwater, and the gorilla leaves on his horse, with the audience agreeing this was one of the weirdest endings yet. SpongeBob doesn't notice just how dangerous his day-to-day life is until he has an experience with the worst of what could happen. Before the accident, he watched Patrick literally shatter, though it wasn't until his doctor warned him about butt shattering that he really paid attention with the extra context that any of those around him who get injured could have been him instead. So he locks himself in his house and refuses to come out and enjoy all the things he used to. Sandy and Patrick attempt to lure him out with presents and fun, but these are the things that SpongeBob's now afraid of. It's his friends and their well-being that actually gets him to come out of the house when he sees that they're in danger. As in, he always knew they were in constant danger, but seeing them actually get hurt by a gorilla is when he realizes that you can hurt yourself more by staying inside than you can by going out. Sure, being outdoors is risky and you might get hurt, but being inside all the time is a guaranteed way to hurt yourself in a less measurable way. Krabbyland. To take advantage of the kids and their allowances being out of school for the summer, Mr. Krabs builds Krabbyland, a playground outside the Krusty Krab meant to compete with the others. He hypes up the kids with promises of Krabby the Clown, and asks SpongeBob to stall. But SpongeBob struggles to keep the children's attention until he accidentally hurts himself, continuing to maim himself to entertain them. Unable to take any more, he asks Mr. Krabs to bring out Krabby, which is just him with a tomato on his nose, selling more patties. The kids are furious, so they steal their money back and throw it off the roof, while Mr. Krabs takes SpongeBob's place from before. This episode's plot is framed as SpongeBob's love of the summer season being revealed, built up, then let down, before being saved by a holiday miracle. In other words, it's the same formula used for most holiday specials, but instead of finding a Christmas miracle, it's a summer miracle, reinvigorating SpongeBob's love of a holiday he spent the episode trying to defend, only to have his heart broken by greed. SpongeBob, like the kids, is excited for summer break despite being an adult and not getting a real summer break. But Mr. Krabs attempts to capitalize on that fun by profiting instead of letting kids be kids for free. When everything is done for a profit motive, the only fun that can be had comes at a cost, though this is going to be true of anything. Any amount of holiday magic, or just a normal summer evening playing in the park, is going to come at the cost of someone's effort. This is true whether it's a parent watching their kids while they play, or the folks who came together to build the park in the first place. At the end of the episode, it's not a miracle of summer that saves the day, but some kid throwing money off of a roof, while the bad guy, Mr. Krabs, is force-fed lima beans. Again, not by magic, but just by some guys. The camping episode. Squidward is upset to see that SpongeBob and Patrick are camping a few feet from his house, joining them to show how a real outdoorsman camps when he imagines they're making fun of him. They pass the time with marshmallows and campfire songs before SpongeBob warns Squidward about sea bear attacks. Squidward, not believing in sea bears, does everything on the list of how to attract one, succeeding and getting repeatedly mauled as the bear is attracted to his attempts to flee as well. In the end, Squidward climbs inside of the dirt circle, warding it off, as a sea rhinoceros follows up. While SpongeBob and Patrick are in a majority of this episode, they're not really the characters who incite anything. They exist for Squidward to play off of, and this is something they accomplish by doing nothing at all. At least, nothing directly related to the characters who instigate the plot. SpongeBob and Patrick are minding their own business, loudly but no louder than usual, and Squidward is the one who assumes they're out to get him, assigning meanings to their actions the whole time, then setting out not to prove SpongeBob and Patrick wrong, but the made-up versions of them in his head. This is no different from a typical Squidward plot, where there's no real conflict that motivates him outside of the assumption there should be one. But how it differs is just how little SpongeBob and Patrick really do. Squidward instigates every conflict, even calling over the sea bear that attacks them just to prove a point. As usual, Squidward is his own worst enemy, he just doesn't realize it yet. Missing identity. SpongeBob is in a diner, getting the attention of the other patrons by telling the story of how he lost his identity, by which he means his name tag. After getting tangled in his bedsheets, falling down the stairs, and eating some of Gary's food out of curiosity, SpongeBob hastily puts on his uniform, says hi to Patrick, then arrives at the Krusty Krab. He panics as he's missing his name tag, and there are uniform inspections that day. Attempting to retrace his steps fails, as he keeps repeating this incident from that morning until Patrick forgets his line, eventually realizing that name tag might be in the dumpster. SpongeBob and Patrick search through the sludge-like garbage when Patrick finds a name tag on SpongeBob's shirt, which he was wearing backwards. In the end, SpongeBob fails the inspection due to swimming in garbage and gets kicked out to the diner, where the story has managed to kill 11 minutes. SpongeBob is a perfectionist when it comes to his work, and like a typical perfectionist, the things he does to achieve that goal often get in the way of what he actually wants to do. SpongeBob obsesses over missing his name tag, and assumes that failing a uniform inspection will be the end of his career, or at least, how he wants his career to go. Squidward can pass these inspections just fine, so the standards can't be that high. So his obsession goes from his job to a metric of how he's doing his job, from being a good employee to getting his name tag back. He retraces his steps, all except the moment where he frantically puts on his uniform because he is running late. To SpongeBob, the idea of running late for work and being a bad employee is so awful he doesn't even recall the near miss from the beginning of the episode. He and Patrick end up diving into a dumpster so SpongeBob can pass a uniform inspection, one that requires him to not smell like he dived into a dumpster. All of this is caused by SpongeBob's fear of being a bad employee, and all of his actions, like skipping work to retrace his steps, actually end up making him a worse employee when a good employee would have just borrowed a uniform. Plankton's Army. After 25 years of failed attempts to steal a Krabby Patty, Plankton's being demotivated by his lack of size and lack of authority. But then he remembers he has family nearby and they can simply outnumber Mr. Krabs, working together. The redneck-like Plankton family agrees to go after the secret formula in exchange for root beer, and after a bit of mocking over being named Sheldon, they head out to tear apart the Krusty Krab. With Mr. Krabs out of the way, the Planktons break into the secret formula safe, where Plankton discovers that the Krabby Patty secret formula is ground-up plankton. He and his family flee in terror as Mr. Krabs reveals that that wasn't the real formula, but a fake one to freak out Plankton. Plankton is small. This is the running joke with his character, that for as large as his ambitions are, his actual ability to achieve these has never matched the idea. Compounded onto this is the fact that his actual ambitions aren't even that great. He wants to start a fast food restaurant and keeps failing despite hatching schemes on par with those of a supervillain who might want to take over the world. Like a villain with an embarrassing first name, Plankton's speeches don't really reflect the reality of what it is he's actually trying to do. Sheldon is about as intimidating as a villainous wannabe fry cook. This is part of why he's doomed to fail, but the other part is just status quo. Plankton's biggest weakness is his size, and this is offset by the extra numbers he brings along. So while it seems like he might have finally succeeded, after all, he's undone his major failing, the plot itself requires that Plankton fails at his attempts to steal the secret formula. So even after getting what he thinks is the formula, he loses the assistance of his extended family because they realize that, should Plankton actually make a Krabby Patty, then according to Mr. Krabs' fake formula, he'll have to grind them up as the ingredients. SpongeBob meets the Strangler. SpongeBob finds a man littering in the parking lot and calls the police on him, with the police revealing he is the Tattletale Strangler, and the criminal vows vengeance against SpongeBob before he escapes. Realizing he needs a bodyguard, SpongeBob asks all the toughest folks in Bikini Bottom before accidentally recruiting the Strangler himself with a flimsy disguise. As he wants to get SpongeBob alone with no witnesses, the Strangler agrees to follow SpongeBob while he does his chores, getting bored and mauled along the way before arriving at the Pineapple for a series of surprise parties. Soon, the Strangler is so sick of SpongeBob that he runs away, winding up in a jail cell where he confesses to being the Strangler, only to wind up with Patrick as a cellmate. Anytime SpongeBob ends up at the mercy of an antagonist, the bad guy of the episode winds up abandoning SpongeBob because he can't stand him. This is true whether it's the Flying Dutchman, Man Ray, Plankton, or the Flying Dutchman again. So when the Strangler is able to get SpongeBob alone and away from onlookers, he winds up more hurt than he would have been leaving the guy alone. Following SpongeBob to hurt him backfired as SpongeBob's personality is just so grating, but only on those who mean him harm. That's a part of being a main character in a comedy. SpongeBob actually getting his butt kicked wouldn't be funny. The funniest way for an episode to play out is for the guy we expect to be big and tough to be on the receiving end of an assault that causes more damage to his ego than his body. Another part of why SpongeBob always comes out on top in these situations, as his ego is too passive to be hurt so easily. Pranks a lot. SpongeBob takes Patrick to a prank store where they buy invisible spray from Frank, the man working there. They plan out a prank only to get into a fight over who gets to use the spray, using up all of it in the process, but turning themselves invisible. Not their clothes though, as it stains. The two then wander around Bikini Bottom, terrorizing the entire town until there's only one man left unscared, Mr. Krabs. They enter the Krusty Krab and prepare to terrify the guy, only for him to splash water on the duo when they threaten to burn $1. This washes off the paint, making them visible and nude, and Mr. Krabs gets them back for their prank by shining a spotlight on them as they leave. Unlike the previous episode where SpongeBob accidentally ruins a guy's life without trying to, this episode sees SpongeBob as the aggressor, working alongside Patrick to pull a series of pranks on the people of Bikini Bottom. So the comedic victim cycle falls on the other foot, where rather than the POV character following SpongeBob around and getting injured, SpongeBob and Patrick are the POV characters, who are on the receiving end of their own pranking spree. SpongeBob SquarePants, as we've seen for the last 3 seasons, is a show that always tries to uphold some sort of karma to its characters. The laughs are almost always at the expense of a character who deserves it. To illustrate this, you only need to imagine this episode ending in any other way. SpongeBob and Patrick get away with everything and have a happily ever after. This wouldn't be a very satisfying ending to an episode, no matter how funny the individual gags manage to be. What is important is that these gags build to something, and the show's repeated use of this karmic justice plot beat means we know how it will end, but then again the actual endings have never been so important as the jokes that got us there. So it's the plot's structure, but not the plot's appeal. And that's the end of the 3rd season of SpongeBob, although where the actual golden age of the show cuts off is more ambiguous and will change from person to person. If you define the cutoff as wherever people stop making memes, then the cutoff is surprisingly recent, as even modern episodes still turn into templates and reactions. If you define the cutoff as anything after the first movie, you forego a lot of the plots that were written by the original crew, simply held back between seasonal releases. About half of Season 4's episodes were written for the pre-movie era, and only animated after the fact. If you base the end of the Golden Age off of vibes, on the other hand, you've made a totally arbitrary cutoff that will change from person to person. Some people grew up with different seasons than others, and as a result, have a different idea of what constitutes their nostalgia. In the end, this video was cut off based on how much time was left in the month, so I could complete the video before July 1st. I originally planned to also include the 10 highest and 10 lowest rated episodes of post-Season 3 SpongeBob in this video, so I could compare the fondly remembered episodes with the ones that people use as examples of seasonal rot. But maybe that'll have to be a future video if it gets released at all. You've probably noticed that there are a few episodes missing from this retrospective, mostly specials and double-length episodes. That's what I get for using the wrong release, I suppose. SpongeBob releases for home viewing have always used a weird episode ordering that puts them into an order other than in which they aired, as well as missing a few other things like the shorts and the specials. But for the purposes of this video, I've said about everything that I need to regarding the original seasons that people still remember so much. And you've probably been reminded of most of it, with very little of what I've said being a revelation at all. Because the only person who can really judge why this show was so well liked is you, the viewer, who statistically grew up with SpongeBob. Anyway, that's the end of this video. If you've been listening to this in the background, here is your warning to start looking for something else to listen to. I would recommend one of my own videos, but I am biased in this regard. Because short of just repeating jokes verbatim, this video will never capture what SpongeBob means to the typical viewer. The bits you repeated as inside jokes to friends and family are the real appeal of the show. No level of analysis will ever really recreate that. So that's not what I hoped to do, merely to give a thorough retelling with a bit of extra analysis so that all that remembering had context to build off of, instead of me telling you when to laugh. Because SpongeBob and Patrick and the rest are already plenty good at making you laugh, and when you can laugh with the show, you can remember the show, though not nearly as well as you remember it after laughing, even after the show is done.